If there's one thing we can all agree on, it's that humans will believe almost anything.
It's 3 a.m., we're just wasting time. Stuck inside our minds. Another sleepless night.
On Blasphemy with Chris and Marnee, we take a look at some of these beliefs, uncover their very human origins, how they've developed and changed over time, and the very real consequences they had in society and culture. Impacts that continue even today in our lives. Welcome to Blasphemy. My name is Chris, and with me as always is my wife Marnee.
Hello.
Hey! And this is part 2 of our Christmas series, and honestly, I'm just going to be straight up honest with you. This is more a Christmas present to myself. Because we're not going to talk a ton about Christmas, but more about, we'll talk about the Bible, and we'll talk about Christmas to a certain extent, but what I really wanted to tackle was the stuff that is underlying all of this stuff, right? And that is astrology. And we hear that word, just the mention of that word, and you get this huge, range of responses. Everything from, it's magic from the universe controlling us to it's dark forces from the devil trying to drag us to hell, which I believe are both ludicrous and super lazy.
or that it's nothing and hooey.
Sure, there's superstition. It's just generalities published in newspapers. It's just bullshit for the gullible. And hey, it's been used as all of that.
Yeah.
So it's not like
For sure.
You don't have evidence.
You all win.
Yeah,
Everybody's right.
Now, I'm not going to tell you what I think of astrology today because you can go read all about it at my website. This is a total shameless plug, hereticastrologer.com. You can see what I think about astrology, and if you like what you see, you can order a reading from me. I'm not going to tell you who you're going to marry or when you're going to die or how much money you're going to make or any of that nonsense or what your past life was or any of that kind of shit, but I have a certain way of showing you how amazing you are through it, and I think that it would be positive for you. So if you're into it, check it out, hereticastrologer.com. Plus, we get to meet face-to-face, potentially, which would be super cool. And also, just kind of as a special announcement, I'm actually going to be teaching courses in astrology, kind of focused on reading your own chart for your own personal discovery and development. And I love teaching astrology. I think it's, as we'll see through this episode, that there is a certain significance to it. I don't believe that it's magic or that it's something like that. But I'm going to start this coming up January 17th with an introductory session. There'll be 7 total and take you through the whole system of astrology. And you'll get an in-depth knowledge, and by the time you're done, you'll be fluent in kind of the language of astrology and be able to look at your own chart, or anyone else's, really, and understand what's being represented in there and kind of come to some conclusions and statements around what it says. Super cool. I think you guys would like it. So again, check out Heretic Astrologer. Right there, you can see how you can register and sign up.
Right where do you see?
Right on the front page of Heretic Astrologer, the
Oh.
first thing you'll see is to register. And so you click on that and you can, space is limited. So if you want to do that and maybe listen to this episode. And if at the end you're like, that's interesting. There's a whole lot more. And I love teaching that to people. And so check it out. Now,
Chris is an amazing teacher.
Thank you. Now, Most people today, though, consider astrology superstitious nonsense and just, something from the past.
Yeah,
Right?
yeah.
It's not relevant to their life today, obviously.
Yeah.
And I understand that standpoint. Like,
Mhm.
there is a part of me that also believes that same thing.
Yeah.
And so the problem is, though, is that your life, my life, all of our lives have been ordered around and defined by astrology. Not because it's controlling us, but because we formed our perspective and philosophies around it and then built the world on that foundation.
Yeah.
And so here, I really need to separate, though, before we get into this, like two different concepts. On one hand, you have astrology. That's a thing,
Mhm.
okay? And like most I would say all philosophies, religions, these types of disciplines, it's really a thing of things. There's so many systems and different ways of looking at astrology and different takes and different, just like there's different takes on everything out there, right?
Yeah.
And so astrology is a thing, right? It's a thing of things. There's no singular astrology.
Yeah.
Now, underlying all these systems, though, and as we'll see, our entire world is astrological thinking. And so this is how I would define astrological thinking: the projection of the human experience onto the sky, symbolizing, mythologizing, and then aligning ourselves and our world to it. In other words, we made it up and then made it real, in
Yeah.
a sense.
Yeah.
We're going to see our whole world is defined by these concepts.
Yeah.
I'm not saying that means it's real or true. What I'm saying is that's fact.
This is the whole purpose that we do this podcast, because beliefs that we carry as humans are made real by us believing them and living out our belief.
Exactly.
And it becomes enacted. It becomes really, really part of our existence. And so that's why we're like talking about beliefs in order to be aware of what beliefs we have that we're making real, and do we want to make them real? Is that wise to make them real?
Right.
And just to know our world.
Yeah, to understand the power that we have
Yeah.
through this thing of imagination and belief,
Yeah.
and then action in line with that, and what does that produce, and
Yeah.
do we want to produce that?
Right.
While you may argue that the systems of astrology were codified in the Middle Ages or in 6th century Babylon, astrological thinking goes back millennia, possibly to the very beginning of human consciousness. Going back to around 32,000 BCE, around the period that our current human brain solidified into what we have now, human remains have been discovered. So evolutionary biologists and evolutionary psychologists and other branches of scientific disciplines have come to the conclusion, and this is through like digging up skeletons and scanning skulls and then kind of reverse engineering what their brain would look like. I mean, their brains are literally imprinted on the inside of their skulls, and so they're able to scan these things and create computer models and see what does their brain look like.
That's wild.
And we see the human brain change over time, and the brain that we have, that we emerge into this world with, came together about 33,000 years ago in what's known as the Pleistocene era.
Like our brain hasn't evolved for 32,000 years.
Well, evolution is a process that happens very slowly.
Right.
So has it evolved? Yes, in
Yeah.
probably very,
very
indiscernible ways.
indiscernible.
And then in, fucking 10,000 years from now, maybe it'll look a little different. Or 30,000 years from now. I don't
Yeah.
know. But the point is, like, that's when our brains came together about this time. Okay. And so going back to around then, where was I at? Oh, I'm saying human remains have been discovered from that time, though. Like, obviously, we've dug up. That's how we've learned all these things, right? These ancient ancestors of ours. These ancient ancestors of ours have been found to carry objects such as bone plaques that are engraved with the positions and phases of the moon as it moves across the sky. This essentially served as a calendar, which researchers believe allowed them to plan, schedule, and order their lives around time, looking to the constantly changing face of the moon. So what we see when we go really far back in the art and the kind of spiritual ideas that we can see creeping through art and pottery and figurines that have been found
Mm-hmm.
is that the moon played a very big role. And if you think about it, that makes sense because the moon's face is always changing, right? You
Yeah.
can see it change every night, right? The sun, as we'll see, changes and moves in a very slow kind
Yeah.
of way. I mean, daily we see kind of the cycle of the sun, but it's constant. And it's a daily thing. The moon, every day you look up and it looks different.
Yeah.
And so it became this thing that we looked to. And it seems that they were tracking, watching, understanding, recording where these things were in
Well,
the
yeah. If
sky
it changed,
already.
if the moon changed every day, it would be the perfect thing to track time with.
That's how we track time for
Yeah.
until the solar year, and
Yeah.
we calculated how that we were going around the sun and how long that took, and all the adjustments that have come along. But before that,
Yeah.
lunar calendars,
Yeah.
right? Because it is 30 days, 28 days,
And there's a
you're-
visual
right?
for you to mark.
Right, and that's what was carved on these plaques,
Yeah.
or the phase of the moon in this little track that, you can imagine them going like, "Hey, meet me at this fucking big rock that we always meet at when it looks like this and it's here."
Yeah.
And they were able to then like begin organizing their lives, but they were looking to the sky for
Yeah.
these things,
Yeah.
right? They also think this shows some understanding in how the lunar cycle affects animals and their movements, allowing them to predict and track the natural resources they were completely dependent on. So they also found a lot of implements for hunting and kind of tracking and things that seemed like they were on a trek. They had medicinals and all these things that were going to allow them to survive. And it's potentially, kind of an possible that these people understood and you even used that to understand the flow of nature because we are
Yeah.
tied to the moon. Many, many mammals are
Yeah.
tied to the cycles of the moon when it comes to their movements, their mating habits, and things like that.
Yeah. And if they didn't have any other distraction, I mean, that was their whole life was to track their animals that they're going to use for food
That was all
and
they thought
clothing,
about.
right? There was nothing else.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
it seems like, oh, wow, that would have taken some extra knowing, but not really. There was nothing else to know but that.
Yeah, yeah. It was literally like, it wasn't like, there's nothing good on Netflix tonight. It was, we need food. So what can we do
Yeah.
to increase our ability to fucking get food, right? The point is, we have long looked to the sky in order to understand our world. Moving forward to around 14,000 BCE, we see more developments along these lines of connecting the sun, moon, planets, and stars to our experience. There are many Paleolithic sites that feature incredible works of art that depict life and belief at that time. Probably the most significant of these discoveries is a place called Lascaux Cave in France. On its walls are some of the most incredible examples of Paleolithic art and thought. Researchers have dubbed it the prehistoric Sistine Chapel. In it is a highly adorned chamber which features a circular belt of illustrations that are made up of animals. The depiction shows an incredible amount of artistic development and sensibility that had been steadily advancing over thousands of years in all likelihood. They are beautiful and illustrated in ways that make them appear to almost be moving. Like, if you've never seen this, like, look it up. It's fucking gnarly.
What's it
right?
called again?
Lascaux Cave.
Where's it at?
It's in France.
Oh, okay.
And it is this cave that the walls are just this incredible display of prehistoric artistic ability, understanding. It is awesome. And there's this chamber that kind of has this like almost hole in the ceiling, so it created this like circular, like almost donut thing on the ceiling, and around it are painted animals.
That's
okay.
Interesting that France. I mean, it's a place of art that that's what we think of when we think of France, and that this ancient stuff.
Yeah, who knows? Maybe deep roots. But I mean, that part of Europe was a part where humankind was kind of happening, at this period, 14,000 years.
Yeah, I'm just
There's a
saying
lot of
it's
prehistoric shit in France.
interesting that we collect a lot of our art there, and and then that is also there.
And who knows? Maybe it's maybe this was
Right?
like the ground zero of
Set
like
the-
I don't know. But that's very
Set
interesting.
the tone for
Nice
France
little
thousands
link.
and
Yeah.
thousands of years ago.
Way to go, France. Fucking for like 16,000 years, you've been bringing the art.
Bringing the art.
Within these skillful paintings, there are clearly deliberate points included, some inside the animals themselves, some outside of them, and grouped together in clusters. For a long time, researchers simply attributed this to the primitive nature of the people, or maybe guides or sketch points which were never covered or removed. It wasn't until advancements in technology that scientists were able to look closer. A field of archaeological research that was only possible through the use of advanced computing has taken a deeper look at many of these incredible sites. It's known as archaeoastronomy, and through the use of our developed knowledge of the movement of the heavens, it has been able to create applications and technology that allows researchers to wind back the sky to get a visual picture of what our ancient ancestors would have seen. Okay, so we're going to talk about this in a little bit, but we tend to look at the sky and go, it's always looked like this. Like they saw this. They didn't, actually. And we're going to talk about why that is. And so we've developed, based on starting all the way back then, our observation and ability to predict and track the movement of these things, leading all the way up to today where we've added advanced space exploration and fucking technology out there with telescopes in space and beaming shit back to us. And then here, computing and adding to our knowledge of these things in the sky and what's making them move and how they're doing it. We've been able to then go, what did it look like to them? And go all the way back and kind of wind back this slow change in the sky to see what the fuck were they looking at. You see, while the objects in the sky appear to move in a consistent, never-changing pattern, this is due to the fact that changes take place so slowly, it appears to be static over hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of human lifetimes. In reality, the universe is always in constant motion and change. Always. It's just so slow that our lives are like, who cares? It's a speck, nothing, right? And so we don't get to observe any of this, but from a bigger perspective, it's changing. However, when you turn back the stars to say 14,000 BCE, the sky looked very different, leading them to track and give significance to objects, constellations, and other celestial information that we simply don't see the same way, right? Think you take our sky and shift it a little bit, and it's like all of a sudden we would come up with different kind of like things that we're focusing on and stuff, right? For instance, our current pole star, Polaris, nailed it with that name, the star closest to the North Pole of the Earth around which the circular motion of the night sky revolves, only became our pole star in about 500 CE. Prior to that, a star named Thuban in the constellation Draco played that role. This slow shift in where the North Pole of the Earth points is known as stellar precession. Polaris will remain in this position from the Earth standpoint until about 3000 CE, when a new star will take its place, shifting the view of the heavens again. So when you look north from the North Pole, the stars seem to rotate in this circle, right? And that's because that star, it's an optical illusion, and there's all kinds of shit happening. It's not really happening that way, but it rotates around a point that the North Pole of the Earth points to a star, right? And we assign a star or whatever it's close, and within a certain, kind of degrees of it or whatever. The one we have now has only been that for 1,500 years. Prior to that, it was something else. And there was something else before that, and it's going to be something else after this. And so you have to understand these things are moving. They're changing. It's not, the fucking, people think like when they looked up in the sky in the Bible, they saw the same thing. Well, the same constellations and shit were going on, but the sky did look different, and there was different opportunity for mythologies and stuff to emerge. Does that make sense?
Totally.
Okay, sweet. What researchers have found is that these seemingly extraneous marks and points line up with stars, planets, and constellations that our ancient ancestors would have seen. Including these significant celestial objects into their art, specifically with animals as symbology, shows that astrological thinking has been with us for as long as we've been around, it seems. Like what they found was like, oh my God, we can line up things that definitely they could be representing here. These points are deliberate. They're not mistakes. And to think that these people that could paint these incredible, amazing looking things, and then these rudimentary points somehow are like because they're so primitive, that's fucking doesn't make any sense. But as these archaeoastronomers have started looking at this, they're like, we can actually line up shit. And it's like very interesting that they could be depicting constellations. In fact, many researchers have dubbed this the prehistoric zodiac because it's a circle of fucking animals, which we're going to talk to, with stars that seem to be represented both, in the animals and, like they were kind of symbolizing something in the sky, right? But from a human perspective, like they're communicating a human experience. You see that in this cave. And so, interesting, 14,000 BCE, right? That's 16,000 years ago. It's fucking
wild.
That's might as well be forever, right?
Yeah.
In fact, as they have studied other highly adorned prehistoric caves, they have found that they were seemingly picked due to their orientation towards specific events, such as the sun rising on the spring equinox or winter solstice. So they found, like, why did they pick this cave? There's a bunch of caves around, but this cave, when the spring equinox, the sun rises, it shines directly in this cave and creates this whole effect. I mean, there's some wild shit out there.
Yeah.
Even to the point of, like, Neanderthals, which we envision as these oafish, almost like, dumb caveman people, and yet they found art tied to them as well that is certainly communicating something much deeper than what we think these people were capable of. And we're going to get way, we're going to see it goes way beyond what we could ever fucking imagine. The most significant of this early development, providing a look at how truly advanced these ancient humans were, is a site called Göbekli Tepe. It is probably the most significant archaeological find ever, and one that few people have ever really heard of.
I've heard of it. Why have I heard of it? You've talked about it.
I've probably said it, but if I didn't say it, would you have heard of it?
No. But we've what conversations? Why have we? Because it's not.
I'm going to tell you about it, so I'm not going to tell you what conversations we've had. I don't want you to know.
It's a fun word to listen to, so I know that I've heard it.
It's a fun word, Göbekli Tepe.
Göbekli Tepe?
Yeah, so Göbekli Tepe means pot-belly hill.
Okay.
And was unearthed in southeastern Turkey, a region known as Anatolia. In 1963, a team of American and Turkish researchers were surveying this region looking for megalithic structures. This region, as far as we know, was the place where humans first began living together in large groups, spurring the agricultural revolution that would change how we live forever. So this was a place that we began to find evidence that this was where humans first started congregating, domesticating animals, growing their own food, and then they figured out of that, they had time to develop skill and religion and philosophies, which led to temples and cities, so this is where it seemed to begin.
And that was in Turkey.
That was in Turkey. And so in 1963, a team of American and Turkish archaeologists, they're roaming around going, we're going to find, and they began finding these megalithic structures, which is like these, that's like pyramids and, like things that are like big. And so they're going around and they're trying to find shit, This team came across a location with a few large carved stones poking up out of the ground. Some local villagers and shepherds also showed them ancient carvings and worked stones they had gathered for use in their homes and other building projects, like walls for their sheep and shit. They're like, well, wait, maybe we pulled some other shit over here. You want to see this? And these were dismissed, though, as too recent, figuring they were likely Byzantine gravestones due to the level of skill and craftsmanship. And so they moved on. Right? They're like, no, we're looking for prehistoric stuff.
People.
Right. It's going to be rudimentary. Yeah. It's going to be very rough.
Animalistic.
Very going to be all that
primal.
Shit. Right. Exactly. The site would sit there unknown and unearthed until 1994, when a German archaeologist named Klaus Schmidt was looking for another site to dig. As he reviewed documents from archived reports, he ran across the 1963 report from Anatolia. Figuring that something was clearly there, he decided to make this his next excavation, right? So he's like, his project just ended, and he's like, I gotta find a new site. He's not looking for anything in particular, apparently, and he's going through documents, kind of other field reports and stuff, and he comes across this one, and he's like, oh, no one's ever looked here. They found something.
Yeah.
Whatever. I'll go I know something's there. It's not like I'm shooting in the dark, and so I'm gonna go check it out. What he would find would take everything we thought we knew about ancient humans and completely blow it up. Over the next decades, he would unearth a series of stone ringed enclosures. The construction of these megalithic enclosures had an interesting characteristic. It seemed they would build one, use it for a period of time, to only then completely backfill it in and build another on top of it. In fact, the hill itself was essentially man-made through the process of this building, burying, and then building on top. There aren't big hills in this area. And there's this weird hill, and it has this bump on top. That's why it's called Göbekli Tepe, pot-bellied hill. It's this hill with this weird round thing. Well, what they found was it started on the ground, not on the ground, but just slightly above the ground, as these ringed enclosures, and then they would bury them and build another one and bury them and build. Over thousands of years this happened, and it created this bump, this hill that's called Göbekli Tepe by the locals because it looks like a fucking potbelly hill or whatever, you know. This process of like burying the thing really helped out us in the future when it came to science, because you can only date organic material. We can't date stone. Right? Carbon-14 dating only works on carbon-based stuff, which is organic material.
Okay.
So typically, you know, stuff is left out and then, you know, it's contaminated by other or over time. And so you can't really date it, which is why sometimes you get dates back that says, well, it could either be 10 years old or it could be fucking a million, you know, like it's just this crazy like range. Well, because they kind of entombed all this stuff in there, they kind of sealed it, they were able to take core samples and things and get organic material from in there and date it accurately. Okay. The most complete and intact enclosure, known as Enclosure D, dated to around 9600 BCE. That is 6,000 years before the wheel shows up in the archaeological record. Later, Schmidt brought in ground-penetrating radar to get a look at what was underneath, right? So he's excavating from the top of the hill, and he excavates these 4 enclosures.
Right.
And he's like, holy shit. And he's looking at this hill like, there's clearly, this is built. This is a process.
Yeah.
So he brings in ground-penetrating radar, right, to get a look at what's down there. Because we have this technology where we can shoot this radar down through the ground, and it bounces back, and these different frequencies of it bouncing back, we can create an image. It can show us literally like densities and things and create an image of what's underground.
Kind of like ultrasound.
Yeah, exactly. What was discovered is that at least another 16 enclosures are entombed in the hill. Core samples were taken in order to date them. The results pushed the building of these lower and thus earlier structures to around 11,000 to 12,000 BCE. That is 14,000 years ago and at the end of the last great ice age. So this is like the beginning of fucking us to a very large degree. Okay? Because yes, our brains look the same as, say, 33,000 years ago, and then the Ice Age hit and it fucking laid waste to the earth and created this very intense, and then we kind of reemerge out of the Ice Age a little different into a different world. And this is that time. Right? That's fucking crazy, by the way. Maybe some people are like, oh, whatever. I don't think you understand. What I'm going to tell you is going to... Some people may say, okay, then it's not 14,000 years old, you know. It is. They've done this over and over. It has been verified scientifically. This is that old, right? So what's so special about it, though, beyond its age? So what? It's fucking old, right? Lots of old things out there. We talked about, 30,000-year-old, remains that had bone plaques with the moon on it, right? That's way older than this. Everyone should, after this, search Göbekli Tepe. It's Gobeklitepe, by the way, and take a look at the images. It will blow your fucking mind, okay? Because what you're expecting is not what you're going to see. The enclosures are focused on a central pair of megalithic T-shaped pillars, each between 10 and 20 feet tall and weighing between 40 and 60 tons each. A nearby quarry contains one of the pillars that was being carved out of the rock. It's ginormous, weighing around 100 tons. The evidence shows that when they tried to pry it free from the earth, it cracked, requiring them to move on and start another. So they've actually found nearby a rock quarry where they literally had carved out these fucking pillars. Now, they're giant T-shaped pillars. Okay, now I'm gonna kind of give you a picture. I'm gonna read, and you can hopefully that will help.
Okay.
Imagine this ring of large stone pillars with rocks in between them forming a wall.
Okay.
And in the middle, set into the ground, into the stone, carved out spaces like little notches in the stone that they sat in, are these giant pair of T-shaped pillars towering way over above the other stones. Okay. These central pillars are surrounded by a ring of smaller stone pillars, just like I said. Rocks filled in the spaces between them, forming a walled ring with some indicating a roughly spiral shape. So as the ground penetrating radar came back and as he excavated these 4 original enclosures, they do have slight differences, like stylistic differences, but they're essentially rings. Some of them look roughly like a spiral, but they're mostly just kind of circular, roughly circular or elliptical kind of structures. Okay. The 2 pillars in the middle are anthropomorphic representations, complete with arms folded at their sides and resting above their belts, carved with symbols, decorations, and even a fox pelt loincloth. These people are dressed. And when you go look at it, you're like, Jesus Christ, they're wearing clothes. Like, it's fucking... You have to see these pictures.
Yeah.
I'll show them after this to you so you can kind of get
Yeah.
a picture. But everyone out there, look at them.
Yeah.
It's fucking nuts, okay? There's a belt buckle. It has this decoration that a lot of people debate about what it means. But I mean, it's like, it is this very modern looking. Now, yes, they're also super stylized and weird looking, but the detail involved in the way that they're depicted, it's incredible how familiar it feels to you. All over the site is some of the most incredible art you can imagine, all completed using stone tools. Snakes, foxes, boars, leopards, vultures, dodo birds, now extinct, bulls, scorpions, and other animals adorn the site, all carved in amazing styles, details, with some being high relief figures appearing to stand and crawl on the stone pillars through the site. Some of these pillars were carved in such a way that as we were carving away, they left this fucking lizard, like a detailed, amazing, preserved, incredible lizard that I could never fucking do. Like, as part of the stone, that's called high relief, when you like leave and you're carving
it away.
You're carving it away, and as you carve it away, there's this part of the stone, but it looks like it's standing. It's fucking crazy. You have to go see this shit. It is nuts. The site itself has drawn a lot of speculation as to its use, as you can imagine.
Yeah.
Some suggested it was evidence of communal living. However, no household items or sign of domestic life are found at the site, things that are found in abundance at nearby prehistoric towns such as Catalhuyuk. So nearby there's a settlement called Catalhuyuk, which is kind of a very, very early, one of the earliest known prehistoric settlements. It's when we first started kind of living together. There's houses there. It's fucking crazy. They have a hearth. It has a stone floor. They found evidence that they would like apparently bury their dead, and then after a while they would dig up their skeletons and put them in the floor underneath as kind of some kind of maybe ancestor worship or something like that. We're going to get to like what's going on here potentially. But nearby, they find tons of like soot, fire, vessels, broken pottery, all the shit that goes along with like household domestic life.
Living, yeah.
But at Göbekli Tepe, none of that is present. There's no sign whatsoever that these people were living any kind of domestic life, any kind of life that we would consider like cities or towns or
in that structure.
Right. Tons and tons of bones were found, but all were wild animals with no sign of any domestication happening. These were hunter-gatherers, people who were not supposed to be coordinating together in large groups to tackle such incredible projects, according to our understanding. The bones have human teeth marks on them in many cases, so feasting seems to have been involved. Some human bones have even been found as well, but not very many in relation to the number of animal bones. There is debate as to whether these were ritual burials, sacrifices, or simply accidents during construction. It could have been any of those things, right? They're building these things weighing tons and tons and tons. To think that people didn't die in this process, I mean, go look and see how many people died building the Empire State Building.
Yeah.
People died. Like,
Hoover Dam.
Yeah, so we don't really, exactly, good one. So, like, we don't really know what these, but the human bones are very, very, very few in comparison to the number of animal bones. And again, there's no like domestication indicated. These are wild animals, so clearly they were hunting them. They were not keeping them or raising them or anything like that. The amount of planning, coordination, skill, craftsmanship, expertise, math, physics, and other advanced arenas that had to come together for this to happen is astounding. This simply was not supposed to be possible when it came to our prehistoric ancestors living 12,000 years ago. These weren't abilities they woke up with one day either. They had to develop and progress over long periods of time, traditions and skills being taught and passed on through generations. This blew the scientists' minds. Our picture of what a prehistoric human knew and was capable of was absolutely all wrong. So we were not supposed to be able to do this according to what we understood. Now, this is science. We made the best statements based on the best available evidence. New evidence comes in. It causes us to have to challenge that and change it. And yes, you can hold on and be dogmatic about it, but that's being stupid.
Yes.
Just like in every other belief.
That's why I like science.
Right.
You challenge it. You
Yeah.
find new information. You go with the correct new information.
Yeah, because, I mean, you think about that and then step back and go, okay, you and your buddies do that. Go fucking carve out some, fucking 60-ton or what fucking things and move them up a hill and fucking put them. This took stuff and coordination and just social things that we did not believe had come together yet. Okay, which means we got to fucking reevaluate everything we thought.
Yeah.
Okay. Also included amongst the natural depictions of the animals are other more symbolic carvings and images. An apis bull is represented. That's an ancient solar symbol seen throughout Egypt, India, and the Middle East going back thousands of years. So have you ever seen that bull with the horns and has a solar disc between its horns?
I don't know.
Okay, well, it's a very, very, very ubiquitous and common solar symbol that existed, throughout our cultures and especially in the East and religious systems. There is one depicted on this 14 goddamn thousand years ago, which means, those things had to start somewhere.
Yeah.
What if they started here?
Yeah.
Is the idea,
Yeah.
right? Or earlier than this that we haven't found yet.
And this is the first recording that we have of it.
This is like intense enough, right? Really.
Yeah.
And again, I think a lot of people are hearing this and they're like, oh, it's not a big deal. To scientists, they're just like all beating their head against the wall, like, holy shit, this rewrites history.
Yeah.
Okay. Another celestial image is one of a vulture. Its wing held out like a hand with what is likely the sun floating above it. There are serpents represented throughout the site, some in fanciful and symbolic ways. For instance, there's a couple of examples of serpents woven together in a net-like motif. There are even little humans depicted, but they are headless and running around with huge boners. So on these stone pillars are carved all these incredible scenes of just the natural world. And again, these very symbolic things. We know these aren't literal. They're carving literal stuff.
Yeah.
They're carving animals that are like, like they're all in very like intense, like it's kind of showing like nature, right?
Yeah.
But then amongst that are these weird things that obviously aren't literal. They're symbolic. They're mythological, you could say.
Yeah.
Like the apis bull. The idea of this natural creature with this celestial object between it, linking the two together. Same thing with the vulture, right? Now, there are constellations in the sky that people will link to, like Cygnus, which is the swan, or the vulture, which is right by Scorpio and stuff. And that could be in view here. However, whatever it was, they do have a depiction of a vulture in an almost anthropomorphized kind of form. Its head almost looks like a human head looking, and it's holding its wing out like a hand outstretched open, and above it is the sun. Because the other things seem to indicate the sun, so it's probably the sun. So there is symbology here that's developing. Symbology we saw apparently back in Lascaux Cave, fucking 14,000 years ago too, right? So it's like humans are obviously, this is starting to go on.
Yeah.
The two central pillars are, of course, of particular interest to researchers as they were clearly the focal point. Everything centers around these two. It's a circle, meaning wherever you stand, you look in the middle of these two pillars, right? And they're giant. They're big. You got to go, well, I'll show you pictures, but you got to go see them. They're fucking huge. The consensus is that they are depictions of humans. Although the ancient astronaut crowd obviously says aliens. Duh. And then there's a bunch of like, well, it was Atlantis or it was what? Fucking shut the fuck up. Okay. Scientists who have studied this and weighed it against evidence found in other areas nearby and other sites of the same period in other regions and in countries and places on the globe. They truly believe that these were representations of human beings.
Yeah.
Okay. Yes, they don't look like human beings when you go there. They did have those too, right? But we'll see. But that's what it is, right? I love ancient aliens. We're going to do episodes on ancient astronaut theory. I love the show Ancient Aliens. I do not believe a word any of those motherfuckers are saying. If your title is folklorist, fuck off. I don't care what you have to say. Yes, you think that while you're wearing your little crystal and your turquoise bracelet, but it wasn't aliens that built this. We fucking know that. Okay? So calm down, What's that dude's name? Giorgio Tsoukalos. Aliens.
Is that the guy with the hair?
Yeah, that's the guy with the hair. Giorgio Tsoukalos. He's great. However, there are other statues and carvings nearby that seem to solidify that these were representations of humanity, just like I said. They were representing humans here. And that's going to become interesting as we move forward. In enclosure D, on one pillar is carved the head and horns of a bull. So in this relief coming out of it, right, is this perfect line drawing of the head of a bull, right? And it is highly skilled, by the way. You think that it's like this, people probably have this idea of this like oblong thing with like crazy. No, go check it out and then try and do it with stone tools on a fucking rock. Yeah. Fuck you. It's amazing, right? And so there's this bull head carved on one. The other depicts the two pillars facing each other and holding hands above a carving of a circle being absorbed by another circle, seemingly indicating a solar eclipse, the combination of the sun and moon. This has led many to see these as masculine and feminine representations. Hey, those concepts had to start somewhere because they permeate our spiritual ideas and philosophies for as long back as we have found. You think like, oh, masculine and feminine, that had to start somewhere. And potentially these two central pillars are representing the foundational ideas of that idea. With one pillar carved with a masculine symbol of the bull associated with the sun, and the other carved with representation that seem to indicate the connection of the sun and moon together. So like masculine and feminine, this idea of this duality that makes the wholeness of humanity, right?
Yeah. My thoughts are the beginning of that concept is with humans being male and female.
Yes, but our philosophies and spirituality and the way we viewed the world took time to develop around those. Yes. And I'm saying this looks like a major point of development of these concepts that would then define the way we view and ordered the world.
Yeah.
Right? So those were biological realities, and then we turn them into philosophical meaning, and maybe this is where that's starting.
Okay. I'm not confused. I'm just having ideas.
Well, it's okay. Say your ideas when you have them.
Well, that's what I'm saying.
Right. I hear what you're saying. That we obviously have seen masculine, feminine stuff happening because of that biological diversity of male and female. What I'm saying is that didn't necessarily immediately equal ideas and perspectives and meanings and ways that we then saw the world around those concepts until we started developing that thinking around what is masculine and starting assigning masculine characteristics to things and feminine characteristics to things and defining them as maybe even dark and light.
Right.
Okay. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Is more philosophical development. Yes, you're right.
They took it from the reality of their world.
Exactly. Because we had to. That's the only thing we had to work with.
Yeah.
Is reality and our experience.
Yeah.
As they have further studied and researched these sites, they have found that as they were built, their orientations changed slightly based on the position of large stones that they call porthole stones, features found in homes and other more ritual sites built by ancient humans. So what they found in the homes of nearby kind of early human settlements and then in Göbekli Tepe as well in these enclosures, is that there was always this large stone and it had a hole in it that they somehow carved out of the middle of this giant stone.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's some speculation as what these were.
Yeah.
Some people put very spiritual meaning on them and suggest that it was tied to some ancestor worship and that like the souls of their ancestors could get into their homes or something. And they tie that to like the fact that they found these homes with skeletons under the floors, skulls displayed in their homes. Like they clearly brought their dead relatives back in. And so maybe something was going there. But there's also more practical ideas around were they just kind of viewing points to be able to observe certain celestial phenomenon, track certain celestial groupings, planets, constellations, whatever they were seeing in the sky and venerating, right? Or noticing and assigning significance to for whatever reason.
Okay.
The consensus among archaeologists and researchers is that the enclosures at Göbekli Tepe were used exclusively for ritualistic purposes, with some referring to it as humanity's first temple. Again,
that's my thoughts.
As far as we know.
You've been talking. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it seems that way.
Yeah.
I could talk about this for hours, but we need to move on. I will say one more thing, though. There was a lot of discussion and debate around what they were worshiping, though. What was this religion that caused them to undertake such monumental projects over and over and over, spanning thousands of years?
I wonder what stopped the building of the rings.
Yeah, that's a great question.
That was like one of my first questions. Like, why'd they stop doing it?
No, what's even kind of fucking crazy is what they found is that the enclosures that are older in the ones that they've excavated so far have the higher level of skill. It's almost like it peaked and then they lost it.
They were declining.
And they were doing
and then they lost it. That's why it stopped.
Then they did like shitty strip mall Göbekli Tepe stuff, and then eventually it's like, oh fuck it, we're going to Amazon.
It's the perfect example of our fucking amazing architecture that we used to build, and you now look at the modern like.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah, that's kind of like what it seems to happen. I mean, again, it's amazing, even the bullshit the stuff that's like less good, but I couldn't do any of it. Based on evidence found in nearby Paleolithic sites and communities, there is a growing number of researchers who believe this signaled a radical shift in the human perspective on the world. For eons, primitive man lived as part of nature. Not an important part, just part. In fact, the idea that we were at the top of the food chain was ridiculous at that time, and it is clearly shown in their art and spiritual ideas. We were intricately and completely tied into the flow and rhythm of the natural world. Not above it, in it, and only a small part of it, often its victim. Right? And so when you see this prehistoric art in places like Lascaux Cave and other examples, you can see where they placed man. They're small. They're not significant. The significance is this natural world that is raging and that they're just trying not to get trampled by or, fall victim to. They saw themselves as part of this world and not a huge part of it, right? They weren't like rulers of the earth, these early humans, right? And it shows up in their art and their ideas and their spirituality that we can discern from the evidence they left behind. Göbekli Tepe could demonstrate a shift in this perspective that elevated us above nature. These towering symbols of humans standing far above the naturalistic depictions below. The humans with no heads and giant boners could be showing the development of these ideas, relegating early man to animalistic existences. No head, right? No human thinking. Only a dick. This base animalistic
driven by your drives.
Instinct, right?
Yeah.
A statue that was found near Göbekli Tepe shows a detailed human figure with a serpent traveling up the back of his head towards the top, the kind of the crown of his head, right? Snakes have long been associated with human consciousness and awakening. This is why ancient Egyptian pharaohs wore coiled up serpents on their heads positioned at their third eye, signifying a higher level of evolution or consciousness. This is a prevalent idea also seen in how Kundalini energy is envisioned. A coiled snake at the base of your spine rising up to the chakras.
Yeah.
How many chakras are there, by the way?
7.
Yeah, that's going to become interesting later, so just like remember that number. Previously, it was thought that farming had led to settling, which gave time for the development of religion, leading to the building of temples, and finally cities cropping up around the temples. So that's how we thought things had gone based on the evidence that we dug up. They weren't purely guessing. There was stuff guiding those ideas, but they thought, here's what happened. First, we figured out farming, which led to us going like, hey, we can live together because we have enough food for everybody. And all of a sudden these tribes, these bands started kind of collecting together into large groups. And then that gave, because we're no longer going out and having to like find food and spend all our energy doing that, people start sitting and developing art and ideas and philosophy and religion, which led to...
That's always when a culture has time, they evolve their art and philosophy. And then when the culture civilization collapses, they go back to survival mode, and all that advancement is lost, stops, until they can rise back up to a place of leisure, where they have time for leisure.
Right, and that makes sense, right? That seems like a pattern that...
I learned about that in a book called Dawn to Decadence.
All right, now listen to this though.
Okay.
However, Göbekli Tepe seems to indicate that religion drove humans to build temples and worship to their newfound position above nature, leading to the conquering of it through domestication and farming, which naturally led to settlements that grew to cities. It could indicate that instead of farming that led to time, that led to religion, we had the shift in our religious ideas that all of a sudden took us out of nature, put us over
what made
nature.
That shift?
I don't fucking know. No one knows. I'm saying that the evidence here of what they carved and what they're depicting, they didn't leave any writing because there was no writing.
Yeah.
Which, imagine putting a project together without writing, by the way. That just shows like, I don't know what was going on here. But all of a sudden we have these towering humans that used to be little humans, right? In the grand scheme of things. And now they're towering over nature. Could that shift in perspective of humans seeing ourselves as above nature have led to us then dominating it by domesticating animals, breaking them to our will, taking the fruit and trees of the field and literally creating them how we want.
Something had to happen, or something had to have happened to shift the story.
Right. And then what some researchers believe is that this is an indication of this is evidence of that happening in a particular time.
I said aliens.
Well, obviously it's aliens.
That's what people say.
Yeah, they'll say aliens. I don't like a lot of people say aliens. I've read books about Göbekli Tepe that said aliens, and they're fun, but also not true. It's kind of like never
Didn't
mind.
we just discover that like that's happened this year? They've just said that aliens have been
here? I know there's a lot of stuff going around. I don't want to talk about aliens right now. I have a lot of opinions about aliens. I want them to be real so bad. So like I want to believe.
It's a
I'm
current
like fucking
event.
X-Files.
We'll have to look that up.
I know. I keep up with
it.
it. I understand. Is the whole disclosure thing and the fucking. There's been people making statements. I love aliens. I love that shit. But we're not going to talk about it here. And I don't think aliens had anything to do with Göbekli Tepe.
I know. I was just stating. I just saw that in the headlines.
Yes.
Recently.
Aliens have been in the headlines.
Yes.
Recently. Yes. And it's cool. And we'll talk about it probably in future episodes because I love that shit.
Yeah.
I do. I mean, if you saw my watch history.
I know you do. I know you know a lot about it. I know
a lot of weird shit.
There's a whole like rabbit trail that we don't have time to go down.
It is possible that these early humans were worshiping human consciousness itself, placing themselves above nature rather than as part of it. A legacy that humanity inherited and went buck wild with to this day. Maybe a more direct way to put it is, it seems that we started worshiping ourselves. So one of my favorite books ever is a book called Sapiens by a guy named Yuval Harari. Everyone should read this book. It's so fucking great. I love how he defines humanity in the book. He said, humans are gods who don't know what they want.
I've heard you say that.
Right. And that is like, it seems at this point is almost the point where we started seeing ourselves as gods, right? Now, yes, we would create gods, but what we'll notice is that,
They're
well, the
like,
gods we create are very human. Have you ever
Surprising.
noticed that it looks just like a bunch of people? But then we
Surprising.
go like, we're going to give them superpowers. But here's the problem. Today, we can do everything the gods did.
Yeah.
And so now we're really dangerous because we're gods, all-powerful gods who don't know what we want. That's real good. But read that book. I highly recommend it. It's fucking fascinating. Anyway, whatever their intent, it is clear that astrological thinking was playing a role as celestial symbology is seen throughout, meaning the very ground floor from which the modern world would eventually be built was framed in symbolism that would become astrology. Our system of Western astrology has come down to us through various developments and the blending of ideas over millennia. Sumerians were casting charts and using them to understand the world in 5000 BCE, ideas that spread throughout the Middle East. Egypt has a legacy of astrology going back to prehistory. By 2100 BCE, they brought in the concept of deacons and the precessional ages of the zodiac, which we will discuss more in a bit. So, very early on, going all the way back to 5000 BCE, when we find evidence of this stuff, which means when we find evidence that in 5000 BC the Sumerians were casting charts,
Yeah.
they didn't wake up one day and cast those charts, right?
Yeah,
and so
yeah.
this shows a period of long development of these ideas. So reaching way, way back, we were already starting to develop these astrological systems and ideas, mythologies, and uses, right?
Yeah.
By the 7th century, the Babylonians had delineated and defined the 12 houses, and by the 5th century, were using personal birth charts. But it was the Greeks who really packaged the version of astrology that we use in the West. Alexander the Great brings astrology from the Middle East, combining it with and influencing other forms of astrology, including that of the Greeks themselves. We get our vocabulary around astrology from them. So, for instance, the word astrology, it comes from the Greek words astron for star, right? And logos for word.
Yeah.
Astrology essentially means like reading the stars, the things written in the stars, the words in the stars, right? Zodiakos, which is the Greek word from which we get the word zodiac, means circle of little animals. That's what it means.
Yeah.
It comes from the word zoo, which we get zoo and zoology and all that
Okay,
from.
okay.
And diakos, which we get like a diameter of a circle and things like that,
Yeah.
right? And so zodiakos is like a circle of animals, right?
Okay.
And because of its like spelling and stuff, it's a circle of little animals, whatever. Horoscope is a combination of the Greek word hora, which means hours, and skopos, which means to watch or that which is watched. And so watching the hours, watching the celestial heavens move with time,
yeah.
right? And so a horoscope is like what was going on at this hour, right?
Yeah.
Watching the hours, right?
Right.
And so this is where we get our current system of astrology in the West is from the Greeks.
Okay.
But the Greek system was influenced heavily by the Egyptians and Indian Vedic astrology, and their astrologies were influenced by Alexander the Great, kind of like spreading all this wisdom around and syncretizing these systems. And so you see these overlaps, even though there's distinctions between them,
Yeah.
like Vedic astrology and, say, Western astrology. But there's a lot of overlaps as well because there was this kind of common influence that happened. So let's take a look at how even the world we live in has been ordered by this thinking.
Yeah.
The 12 months of the year were developed across a wide array of cultures based on gods that were associated with the 12 signs of the zodiac, thus 12 months. Legacies that still remain on our calendars. January, February, March, May, and June are still named for Roman gods whose monthly celebrations were laced with astrological meaning and symbology. July and August were named for Roman emperors who were elevated to deities. April was named after the Latin word for opening, as in flowers. And then they got lazy with September, October, November, and December because they're named after the numbers 7, 8, 9, and 10.
Lazy.
This is because prior to the calendar reform, the Roman year started in March, thus Mars, ruler of Aries, the first sign of the zodiac. That's why our month is called March because it used to be the first month of the calendar year. And the first sign of the zodiac is Aries, and Aries is ruled by the planet and god Mars. And so we have the word March on our calendars based on astrological ideas, okay? Along with a whole bunch of other ones, whatever. January and February were added later, and the beginning of the year was changed to January 1st. By the way, we get the word month due to the fact that it originally measured the moon's trip around the Earth. Because of this, moon and month come from the same root, just in case you wanted to know. Okay? So, there you go. Just a little knowledge, just trivia, in case you're like, we ever get back into bars and playing trivia. I missed that. We have 7 days in a week. Not because of the Bible, by the way. A lot of people are like, well, because 7 days of creation. No, we had fucking 7 days before that.
Yeah.
Okay? But because of the 7 classical planets and gods considered in astrology. You can see this in the names we call them to this day, right? So Saturday, Sunday, Monday, easy.
Yeah.
Saturn's day, Sun's day, Moon's day,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
What about Tuesday, though? Well, in English, we actually adopted our days through the Norse pantheon, right? And so in Norse mythology, the god associated with the planet Mars is called Tuaz, right? In Spanish, we say Martes, the day of Mars, right? But in English, we say Tuaz Day because it's the day of Tuaz, who was the god associated with Mars, the planet Mars. Wednesday is associated with the Norse god Vodun, their chief god, right? That's why there's that fucking stupid N in there, by the way. Wednesday. It's because it was Vodun's day. And then it changed over time, spelling and shit like all these words, and we end up with Wednesday, right? Now, Vodun was associated with the god Mercury. In Spanish, it's miércoles, right? Miércoles, the day of Mercury,
Yeah.
right? Thursday comes from the Norse god Thor, right, who is associated with the god Jupiter. But in Latin, Jupiter is Jove, right? And so in Spanish, it's jueves, like Jove's day, but that means Jupiter's day. And then Friday, Freya, right, the Norse goddess who is associated with Venus. And in Spanish, it's Viernes, the day of Venus. So even your fucking week is planned according to astrological thinking, right? Or at least it's built on a foundation of these ideas and these legacies that have been ingrained into our very culture.
Yeah.
And so I think that's so cool. Wall Street hopes for a bull market, directly referring to the astrological symbolism of Taurus, the bull, the sign of money, value, and materialism.
Interesting.
They didn't choose any other animal because we had already set in place that the bull represents these things, right? We talk of people being mercurial or capricious or jovial, referring to the astrological ideas around Mercury, Capricorn, and Jupiter. If you have ever been told to consider something, that word comes from a combination of the Latin word con, which means with, and sidereus, which means stars, and you can see that you were being asked to look to the stars to make the right choice.
Interesting.
We call it influenza because they thought it was bad energy flowing from ill-fated astrological placements into people, making them sick. We still call it the flu.
Yeah.
Okay? So, I'm not saying that those things are true and we should believe them. What I'm saying is that our entire world has been framed around this thinking.
Yeah.
And so we should know it.
Yeah.
Because if we know it, then we can understand the meaning of what's going on instead of letting our imaginations run wild and make up bullshit and get us into trouble. The symbol for the British pound is a stylized scale, and we abbreviate pound with LB, short for Libra, the scales. I could go on and on. There's everything you fucking can imagine is tied back to these things that obviously were set in motion tens of thousands of years ago.
Yeah.
The point is, the foundational ideas around how much of our world is ordered were astrological in nature. But obviously, that doesn't include the Bible, right? I mean, doesn't it say something about not doing astrology or that it is evil or something? Christians aren't talking about God and Jesus using astrological concepts when they read the Bible, right? It can't be, right? We think well, it says don't do it. So obviously the Bible is the one thing that escaped any of this influence, right? It actually doesn't prohibit astrology anywhere in the Bible. In fact,
I was going to say I don't remember a verse.
It doesn't, but people try and force it to by saying it says don't do sorcery or divination, and that's astrology, or I don't know, some fucking nerd breaking out some Bible dictionary want to slap with. In fact, the Jewish religion has its own zodiac known as the Mazzaroth, a word that shows up in the book of Job. The zodiac is also tightly tied to ancient Jewish mysticism known as Kabbalah. When the Dead Sea Scrolls were discovered in the 40s, they contained a horoscope cast by the Jewish religious writers and many other allusions clearly indicating that astrology underpinned their philosophical and religious understanding.
Yeah.
So the Dead Sea Scrolls, if you don't know what those are, one thing you need to understand is that when Rome laid waste to Jerusalem, destroyed the temple, and fucking routed the Jewish revolt, they also set about finding and burning and destroying every copy of the Jewish scriptures. Okay. In fact, they kept one and he kept it locked away, hidden. The emperor did from the people, so no one could see it.
Okay.
For this reason, they believe that these sects that were existing kind of out in kind of communal, segregated communities that were writing down these things, buried them in the desert near
it the
Qumran.
Essenes?
So the Essenes are a potential culprit for that. That is one major theory. The Essenes were an apocalyptic cult that were looking for a Messiah to come. We're going to talk a little bit about this in a little bit, but not the Essenes in particular, but you're right. Look at you. The Essenes.
I know the
Look
Essenes.
at you, Bible scholar. Actually,
Duh.
extra biblical scholar. They're not in the Bible. Well, maybe they are in the Bible.
I
Some people believe
swear
John the
that-
Baptist was an Essene. That's
I
a
know.
common thing.
You taught about the Essenes when you were a pastor.
I totally did, and that's a
Okay.
major theory.
I'm like,
and
that's
yes,
not
I
new
did.
information to me. Okay.
Yeah, it's not new, but I mean, it's like these people, though, they buried these things, and we found them. They're near the community of Qumran, near the Dead Sea. That's why they're called the Dead Sea Scrolls. And we found them in like a 47 or something like that, in the late 40s. And these were the most significant
Yeah.
finds because everything had been destroyed, and these things had been preserved.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
and they got all kinds of shit in there. Right?
Yeah.
It does not equal, hey, turns out the Bible's true. It says it in there,
Well,
right?
that's
It's got
what we believed as
everything.
Christians.
Right. Incredibly. Yeah, they kind of nitpick and pick and choose what they want. But there's astrological stuff, including charts that were cast, right? And so to think that this wasn't on the minds of, Jews and leading up to the first century AD, crazy. It's just like to ignore reality, basically.
Yeah.
When the Israelites moved into the land of Canaan, they adapted the ancient Canaanite pantheon, a derivative of earlier Sumerian religions, as their own. They chose to elevate a god known as El. He shows up a lot throughout the Old Testament and was associated with the god and planet Saturn. They elevated him to be the god of creation. His Greek counterpart, Kronos, even fathered the Olympian gods. So I know growing up in the church, we had this idea that, the Israelites just worshiped this God that was unique and real. And then, they moved in. That's not how it went at all. Archaeological evidence has demonstrated that there was this development. All these gods started somewhere, maybe at places like Göbekli Tepe, where these formulations started. The Sumerians had a group of gods, a pantheon of gods associated with planets in the sky and constellations and the zodiac. And then it spread throughout, Babylonian and Hittite and Canaanites. And when the Israelites moved into the land of Canaan, they adopted the local Canaanite pantheon and tweaked it into their own. And they took one of their gods named El. You saw that in the Bible all over the place, right?
I know El.
Right. And elevated him to this position of being the creator God, right? Hey, by the way, what day of the week does Judaism consider sacred?
Saturday.
Saturn's Day. Isn't that interesting?
Oh, El.
The
of
god
Saturn.
El is tied to the god that would become Saturn,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And the planet, right? The
Yeah.
planet and God are kind of
Right.
connected in all of these
Right.
systems. And so, interesting, right? Here we have these astrological concepts forming the very basis of like Judaistic thought and ideas. El, Saturn, has had brothers, sisters, wives, and children. So let's not get caught up in the idea that the Bible is somehow unique, different, or special when it comes to the religious ideas and, quote, history it supposedly recounts, or that astrology was somehow avoided. Throughout the Hebrew scriptures are references to various gods of these ancient pantheons and mythologies, with today's Bible believers making up an idea that they are just different names for the same
Of the
God.
same God, yeah.
They,
I studied the names of
right.
God.
They
K.
aren't.
Arthur.
They weren't, and they didn't believe that to be
It was
true
actually a really
either.
good study.
It is. It's great self-help
Because
nonsense that
no,
you can get from
it's
anywhere
not
else.
self-help nonsense. Self-help is not nonsense. It's
Okay,
just
I
the
won't
same
call it
as other
nonsense.
self-help that you can get anywhere is what it is. It's not like the one true self-help.
And I'm saying it's based off of a wishful thinking that one God is being referenced throughout, especially the
Right.
early. Right.
I know.
I'm not
just
saying that to
but
you. I'm just saying that in general. That
No,
people would say
no.
like it is different. It's just different characteristics of God.
And here's the thing. People have real experiences with these things, and that's what we talk about belief and making them real, right? So I, as a Christian, studied those names of God, and yes, it's bogus, right? Like it was a story back then, and they were actually different gods to them back then, and then it's evolved into today. They go, oh, it's just one name of one God. Still, impactful study for me internally.
And that's cool, personally.
And that's why you'll have Christians argue you
right.
to the
I
death.
don't care if they believe me or not, but I'm right. This
I'm
is
not
true.
saying
I fucking don't know what to say about that. It's like if something that's made up helps people, then that's fucking great.
Speaking of understanding why people believe because their experiences prove to them.
Right. The astrological nature of the Bible is obvious if you look, and also very understandable if you know where the Hebrew scriptures originated. I know many like to think that these are documents written down by the people mentioned in the Bible during the times of the supposed events, but they were compiled, redacted, and written down much later, and over a long period of time. The origination of the Hebrew Bible as we have it today started during the Babylonian and Persian captivities in the 5th through 4th centuries BCE, likely continuing on until around the beginning of the 1st century CE. So a lot of people think these are ancient manuscripts that were kept and over time and just unearthed and copied. That's not what happened. This is largely an oral tradition.
Yeah.
An oral tradition that was evolved and changed and developed over eons, existing in, not eons, but like over fucking millennia and centuries at least, existing in very different circumstances that created different pressures that would create different ideas and philosophies and hopes, that emerge. And then they write those things into. They existed, were ruled by, and steeped in a culture that was defined entirely by astrological thinking. The Babylonian system had the 12 signs as we know them today, the 12 houses, and the 7 planets. It essentially was the astrology we use today, just not put through the Greek filter yet. All of life was associated with the zodiac, and they were surrounded with the symbols and gods associated with it constantly. The Jews existed in a world defined by astrology, and it shows in the scriptures they would curate during these captive periods. Meaning they couldn't help but build their scriptures around the zodiac because it was the very lens they saw the world through, just like everybody else.
Yeah.
And I think we think like, well, I don't know anything about astrology, so like the average person back then didn't. No. These people were brought up with these myths and shown them in the sky.
Yeah.
They could look up and identify features in the sky. We can't do that. I can't fucking do that. I need an app to go like, where the fuck are these things, right? And so, like, these people lived in a different world that had different distractions and a different perspective that required them to have different information. And if their information was your life and your experience is ruled by these gods that are reflected in these heavens and heavenly objects and mythologies we tied to them, you pay close attention and know them and pass them on to people. So before we take a look at the nativity scene specifically, let's take a walk through some of the astrological features of the Bible itself.
Okay.
I mentioned earlier that Egypt had figured out this slow, deliberate movement of the sun. What they figured out was that where the sun rises on the spring equinox every year appears to move backwards in the zodiac, 1 degree every 72 years. So these motherfuckers were smart, first of all.
Yeah.
And they're measuring this. Again, they're worshiping the sun. It's their chief god. They're paying attention to it. There are people that do nothing but watch it.
Like the
record.
priests. That's their life.
Exactly. That's what they do.
Yeah.
And so over time, what they notice is that, weird, the sun is moving backwards on the wheel of the zodiac 1 degree every 72 years. So this very slow movement, and all of a sudden, 1 degree. Now, each sign is 30 degrees.
Okay.
Okay. That means 72 years times 30 degrees. Every 2,160 years, the sun will rise in a new sign, the sign before the one it's rising in now.
Because it's going backwards.
Because going backwards very slowly, right? Every 72 years, it kind of ticks back one. And it does that 30 times. And when it does it that 30th time, it ticks over across into a new sign. And they refer to that as the age, right?
Okay.
So like the age of Pisces, which is the age we're in now, means that the sun rises in the spring equinox in the sign of Pisces.
Okay.
All you people who think that, oh no, Aries, right? Because I was born at that time and I'm an Aries. No, we didn't reorient our charts. We kept the Babylonian alignment, which was formulated in the age of Aries. When the spring equinox, the sun rose in the sign of Aries. But that's not the case today. And in about 100 years, it's going to rise in Aquarius. The age of Aquarius. We're going to talk about that a little bit, by the way.
Age of Aquarius.
We're going to talk about that bullshit in a little bit. The Bible opens with physical creation and the Garden of Eden, an earthy, hedonistic paradise where naked people walked around totally fine while they ate whatever they wanted and didn't have to labor or work for anything. When considering the rabbinical reckoning of the date of these events, it is placed in the age of Taurus in the Old Testament, when the sun rose in the sign of the bull on the spring equinox. Taurus is fixed earth. It is about laying around, eating chocolate, having sex, taking a nature walk, and just enjoying the pleasures of any given moment. A real Garden of Eden mentality. And so the imagery that the Bible opens with is this very Tauran idea. It's very earthy, material, physical. Notice, God doesn't get deep with Adam and Eve in the garden. He doesn't go like, I sat down and talked philosophy with them. He's just like, oh,
enjoy yourself.
yeah, eat, walk around. You don't have to do shit. I
Yeah.
provided everything for you,
Yeah.
right?
You're good.
We see the signals that this age is closing, though, through the allegories included here and moving into the Exodus story. They get evicted from the Eden, for instance. They get kicked out of this fucking paradise. So this is Tauran age, right? What about Cain and Abel, right? This is always a confusing story
Oh,
to me as a
so
Christian because it's like,
confusing.
hey, they both bring the best of what they had to God, which you would think like he would accept both of those. That's all he wants, right? Because later on in the New Testament, he's like, oh, this widow only gave a penny and hers is greater than everybody else's who is rich. You know, and you're like fucking thinking like, God likes you to give the best.
Yeah.
But Cain and Abel come, and Abel is a fucking shepherd, and he brings a ram,
Yeah.
a young ram to sacrifice. But Cain is a farmer, and he brings the best of what he grew,
Yeah.
the finest fruit he had.
Yeah.
And God goes, I don't want your fucking wheat and bullshit.
Fruit.
I only accept Abel's sacrifice of this ram. Why? God never told them. He never prescribed to them, like, make sure you bring me.
I know the answer.
But when you look at Cain as a symbol of this earthy, Tauran ideal of working the earth and kind of stuff coming from the earth, but then you have this ram representing the age of Aries and God kind of signaling here that one is ending and the other is beginning.
Yeah.
Right. And of course, Christians then go like, no, he's tying it to Jesus. No, we'll get to that because he happens to be tied to the ram. Oh, and also, there's another great story. Remember when Moses is up on Mount Sinai and he's getting the Ten Commandments?
Yeah,
and the first
yeah.
time. And he comes down. What does he find him worshiping?
A bull.
A golden bull, right?
Yeah.
And I love this story because he's like, Aaron, what the fuck? And Aaron goes, dude, they brought me their jewelry. I threw it in the fire, and this
And the
fucking
bull
golden
came
calf
out."
came out. Can you imagine having that as your brother? You're trying to lead all these people, and you're like, oh, dude,
Dude.
are you fucking smoking weed again? I just love that story. But again, and he destroys it, and then he throws the plates down,
Yeah.
and he has to go up and get new ones. I don't know what the first one said. What if the first one said,
We're-
like, party, just fuck,
Chill
have a great
out.
time, and
Take it
calm
easy.
the fuck down?
Yeah.
And then God's
then
like, you know
he's
what?
pissed.
Fuck
He's
these
like,
people.
fuck you. Here you go.
Obey
Do
your
or die,
parents.
motherfuckers.
Don't take
Is
stuff
that
and obey
fucking
your
golden
parents.
calf ruined it for all of you.
Yeah, God, I'd love to see those first copies. Not that they existed. But anyway, he comes down. And again, what you're seeing is this transition of like, no, we're not doing that anymore.
That's the old age.
Right. This imagery, is being...
Wait, so the farmer was the Taurus. We're moving out of Taurus into Aries.
Right, and God rejected Cain's sacrifice, which is why he killed Abel.
Okay, so Moses, we were still like in the process of moving out of.
Right, but understand these are huge. These are allegories, right? So you can't, you can't take them as like, wow, that was a long time later. What I'm saying is this opening point. This
ages take a long time. So even if it was a long time later,
I'm saying it didn't happen. And this is a story that is broken up into sections, and this section is astrological, and all the imagery around it is signaling that it starts in this age of earthly paradise, which comes to a close, and you see this signaled through these events.
Yeah. So there's a bunch of stories.
Right, we're going to keep going, so listen to me. We'll keep going. This may help. Okay. From the Exodus to the end of the Old Testament, the age of Aries is in effect. Aries is about conquest, fire, smoke, blazing trails into new territories, battles, God versus God, national identity, and of course, it's symbolized by the ram. As such, all throughout the Old Testament from this point on, you see rams being a very common topic, with the leaders of Israel blowing on a shofar to communicate, and for ceremonial reasons, a shofar is a ram's horn. So what you see is all throughout the Old Testament, after this kind of closing of the age of Taurus, is the dawning of the age of Aries. Even Abraham, right? What was caught in the thicket when he was going to sacrifice his son? A ram, right? And so it's like suggesting all this transition. These were symbols and ideas that had already been fucking established when these scriptures were being written down, not when they were supposedly happened, because I don't think they did. Not that the Bible doesn't include real events or real historical stuff. It clearly does. And it's useful and to a large degree in some of that stuff. Yeah. But it also is a huge cry of the Jewish heart during a time when they were literally outcasts from their God. So they're writing these scriptures from a very certain intent.
Outcast from their God.
Well, I mean, they've been in captivity, and their land
has been... They felt outcast. They thought that's how they perceived.
Their temples have been destroyed over and over. Like, they've been forsaken. Yeah. That's what they saw as. Yeah. And so they're writing these allegories from that standpoint from a world, a Babylonian and Persian world, and then later Greek world, steeped in this system of how you saw the world,
so lenses. They're writing a bunch of stories about their failures to see this transition, and now they're paying for it. They're going, this is why we're experiencing this. Is that what they were doing?
I mean, maybe to a certain degree, that was probably a component of it. I think they were doing a lot of things, and it's hard to know. We can't really say. Yeah. But all I'm saying is that underpinning all of this is astrological imagery and flow that is perfectly in line with what people thought and would use as frameworks and philosophical ideas back then. Their perspective on the world matched this. Yeah. Okay. When you get to the close of the Old Testament, it starts looking forward to a new age, using language that signals a shift. And sure enough, as the first century dawned, the sun moved into the sign of Pisces, the age we are still in today for about another 100 years or so. So what is Pisces all about? Fish, water, spirituality and mysticism, collective unconscious, compassion, healing and empathy, inclusiveness rather than exclusiveness, a spiritual kingdom, not a physical one, universal connection, dreams, visions, and parables. Sounds kind of like Jesus, doesn't it? Right?
Oh, exactly. No, exactly.
That's what I'm saying. Is that
no? It's flashing back. I'm like, when we were still in the church, grabbed onto that, and we're finally at that point where we're like, oh, this is what we need to be focused on. And there was people in the church that were still grabbing onto the old age
Oh, yeah.
and fighting us on, I think we should be focusing on this Jesus Pisces age. We weren't saying that Pisces
We weren't
age
saying
at
that,
all.
but these characteristics.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we got booted out of that place
Yeah. Hasn't it always seemed so
in a passive aggressive way.
Yeah. Hasn't it always seemed so strange how these characters are supposed to be the same God, and yet one is a bloodthirsty, prejudiced serial killer warlord, and the other is an unassuming, meek, inclusive, compassionate healer for all people, teaching them to be nice to each other. Right? Have you ever, I mean, that bugged me. It's like, these are supposed to be the same God.
Mm-hmm.
And yet he seems to be like having some real identity issues.
Yeah.
In one, it's like Jews only and fuck everybody else,
Yeah.
with very few exceptions.
Yeah, yeah.
And then the story of Jesus comes, and all of a sudden it's like, oh,
And they
whole
kept trying to
fuck up.
say, that Jesus was reflected in the old stuff, and you're like,
Okay.
oh,
And I'm going to say, yes, he was, because he's an astrological allegory that
Yeah.
was alluded to, yes, throughout
Mhm.
because of these symbolisms,
Right.
and not because of God prophesying his son really being
yeah,
born
yeah,
on earth.
yeah.
Because that requires a
For
God.
being a god.
The reason is that history is not being communicated here, but astrological concepts that these fantastical narratives were clearly built around. Jesus in the Gospel speaks of a new age that is coming. In preparation for the event of his crucifixion, he sends some disciples in to find a place to have dinner. He tells them to look for a man carrying a pitcher of water, the symbol of Aquarius, long before the New Testament came up with this idea. Jesus himself, in preaching about this coming age, pours water out onto the ground, the creators of the gospel accounts identifying him with the coming Aquarian age. So you see the symbolism throughout
Yeah.
the
Oh, yeah.
Bible. These aren't
So much.
coincidental. And when people would have heard that, they would have thought Aquarius. You don't, because you grew
You
up in
don't know
Sunday
it, yeah,
school
and they told you
taught
not
you
to
this
look
was
at
all
that.
original.
Yeah.
But people in this world would have, you say water bearer or
Yeah.
someone carrying a pitcher of water,
And
they
they
would have thought this.
Yeah.
Even Jews,
Yeah.
because they had long been living in a world that was no longer Jewish to a large extent. Yes, they were trying to maintain their identity, and there's a lot of segregated communities and things, but they were still, it was like anyone else growing up in this world, were steeped in the ideas and the programming that comes along with it,
Mm-hmm.
and theirs was highly, highly astrological.
Mm-hmm.
And while pop astrology and lame songs from the 60s believe this will be a time when humans will regain some lost magical powers or something, that is not what Aquarius is actually about. Aquarius is the most human sign of the zodiac, represented by a man. It is about reasoned thought, society, progressive changes, technology, conscious development, humanitarianism. It's the sign of friendship and groups and social revolutions. It's not a magical time we are looking forward to, but one when humanity will reason out how to live together, progress together, and move things forward as an us rather than the current us versus them paradigm. I hear all these people are like, the age of Aquarius is coming, we're all going to be psychic. There is nothing in
Yeah.
the zodiac to do with Aquarius that has to do with psychic powers.
Yeah.
If anything, that would be the age of Pisces that we're in right now,
Mm-hmm.
which is all about mysticism and the deep.
Which is why they're
underneath.
saying that right now. 'cause
Exactly.
That's
You're just
where they're at in their
reflecting
head.
this age, and you need to fucking change and get with the program because it's coming when we're going to use our human
Stop
abilities.
with the magic and get grounded
Yeah.
into humanity.
When we're gonna leave, Aquarians don't like fantasy. They don't
Mhm.
like that bullshit, right? They like rational, reasonable ideas that affect everyone and make it good for everybody,
Yeah.
right? So, anyway, next time you hear that song, just turn it off. And if you ask me, that is so much more exciting than some bullshit woo-woo nonsense that isn't going to happen, right?
Mhm.
Believe what you want, but I feel like that future sounds so much better
Yeah.
than special people will be going around. Fuck
I'm
off.
so tired of waiting for magic. Let's like
Exactly.
get some real shit going on.
Exactly. Age of Aquarius is going to be a human age and not some magical nonsense. Anyway, just in case this all sounds like a stretch to you, let's take a look at some other biblical shit to see what's up, right? In Ezekiel 1:10, there is this strange vision recorded where God is surrounded by these 4 living creatures. Here's what it says. As for the likeness of their faces, each had a human face. The 4 had the face of a lion on the right side. The 4 had the face of an ox on the left side. And the 4 had the face of an eagle.
Oh, yeah.
So these 4 creatures, and each one has 4 faces, and each of the 4 faces are a man, an ox, a lion, and an eagle, right?
Mm-hmm.
Weird as shit. I don't know if Ezekiel was just like fucking just picking mushrooms along the path or whatever and just tripping balls, but he has this vision. So, sounds weird and kind of metal, to be honest. Like, it sounds like the picture of this would be cool. But there's a deep astrological symbolism that could not have been. Whoops.
It's funny. We used to. I again studied this all for years, and I remember studying this and the symbolism, but obviously not astrologically.
No.
Interpreted.
So there's deep astrological symbolism that could not have been incidental or unintended. The man represents the sign of Aquarius. The lion, obviously. What do you think it is?
Leo. Sorry,
Leo, there you
my
go.
brain was like.
The ox is Taurus, and the eagle is actually Scorpio. And that might confuse people because they're like, I thought it was a scorpion. Well, Scorpio is interesting. It's unique in the zodiac in that for very, very far back in various systems and cultural expressions of astrological thinking, Scorpio has been represented by multiple signs.
Yeah.
So the scorpion is actually the lowest form of Scorpio. It's dark, it's elusive, it's vindictive. It will sting itself if it's mad. You know, like it's
It's like the unevolved, the immature version.
Exactly. The middle form was represented by a serpent, representative of healing and consciousness and things like that. And then the higher form of Scorpio was the eagle, soaring above everything with this keen insight into that which is below. Scorpio's tied to the underworld, that which is below, right? Hidden, secret. And eagles
But
have this eyesight that can see these things that
so
we
the scorpion's
can't.
like down in it, and even the serpent is
On the ground,
on the
crawling through
ground.
it.
Eagle is still having insight into that, but above it,
Right.
outside of it.
It speaks of an evolved kind of intuitive state rather than a lower kind of, And so the eagle represents Scorpio, and they would have understood that because they understood what I just told you.
Yeah.
This is not stuff we made up, you know.
Yeah.
It's stuff that we know because they made it up. Now, again, you might be saying, Chris, this is just coincidental, and you're just trying to make it work. The thing is, these 4 signs are all part of a certain grouping of signs used in astrology at that time and still today. Not only are each of the 4 elements represented by the air sign of Aquarius, the fire sign of Leo, the earth sign of Taurus, and the water sign of Scorpio, they also represent the 4 signs of the zodiac that are and were then considered fixed. So in astrology, there is this concept of each of the elements has 3 signs.
Yeah.
And so like in this case, like let's pick the fire signs, right?
Yeah.
Aries, Leo, and Sagittarius.
Mm-hmm.
Each one of those represents the element of fire, but they express it in different ways.
Yeah.
And so Aries is known as a cardinal sign. That's forward, direct energy that's being injected out into the world.
Yeah.
Sagittarius is mutable energy, right? It adapts, it changes, it morphs with its surroundings and kind of spreads, kind of like a wildfire or forest fire kind of idea, just kind of. Leo is fixed fire.
Yeah.
Fixed represents energy that is constant, maintained. It doesn't change. It's the same, right? It's this level kind of thing. And what you find is in the Bible, God is always referred to using the fixed signs of the zodiac because they're speaking. God never changes. He's the same today, forever.
Yeah.
Right? Yesterday, today, and forever, he's the same. We see these things, these themes talked about. And so whenever Jesus is the what of Judah?
Lion.
The Lion of Judah, Leo, fixed fire. His kingly nature and regal characteristics never change.
Yeah.
He is the Lion of Judah, right? Interesting. So this image uses astrology to communicate that God is over the 4 elements of creation. There are 4 creatures, and each one represents the 4 elements of creation. In other words, they're saying he's over everything of fucking everything, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's what the Bible says in words and in symbolism
Yeah.
here in these visions,
Yeah.
and they're astrological in nature.
Yeah.
They didn't make this up.
Yeah.
They used what was fucking already known.
Yeah.
You also see a lot of numbers repeated throughout the Bible, as well as every other religion, thanks to astrology,
Yeah.
or astrological thinking at least. 12 sevens and 4s show up everywhere. 12 signs of the zodiac, 7 planets, 4 elements. Okay? You have the 12 patriarchs and tribes of Israel, the 12 disciples of Jesus, the 12 foundations in the New Jerusalem with 4 gates, right?
Yeah.
I mean, harkening back to our last episode of Christmas, 12 Days of Christmas came from this. They were associated with zodiac signs originally, right? 7 days of creation, 7 years, churches, letters, spirits, stars, seals, horns, angels, trumpets, plagues, blah, 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 throughout Revelation.
7,
And 12. There are at least 187 uses of the number 12 in the Bible, 22 of them in the book of Revelation alone. And we are going to do episodes
multiples
on
of
the
12,
book.
144,
Exactly,
blah, blah, blah,
exactly,
blah, blah.
exactly. These numbers are not ideas created by them. They are not Christian concepts, and whatever your pastor has told you is way less than accurate, probably. They are concepts that were ingrained over thousands, maybe tens of thousands of years, and absolutely foundational in the world that the Bible was born out of. So when we were in church, they told 7 is God's number of completion.
Yeah.
Well, we're going to talk about what the fuck it means, right? And
Yeah.
by the way, it meant this throughout all kinds of cultures, including the culture that the Bible emerged out of. We just lost our tie to it, and so now we make up bullshit. But both numbers speak of completion or fullness. 12 is the full circle of the zodiac, ending with Pisces only to begin again with Aries. It's a cycle.
Yeah.
It's ongoing over and over, and it represents the completion.
Yes.
Right? 7 is the full expression of the planetary gods or rulers of the zodiac. The fullness of the gods, or the fullness of God, you could say.
Which is what that's where they
Right.
got that from.
7 different aspects, right,
Yeah.
of this, idea.
Yeah. And when we were Christian, they would just say that 7 was the number of God, but they didn't explain why.
They never said, like, why.
And
They're
you're
like, oh,
like,
trust me.
Okay.
I went to Bible college.
7's the number. I don't know why.
College in
It
quotes.
just is.
Yeah,
And
that's
now I
exactly how
know.
they explain it. They're like, no, trust me, it's the number of completion.
just
It's,
the number.
it's God's number.
Okay. And you're just like supposed to say, okay.
Well, it seems like God stole that number from a lot
From
of other people using
other
it
people.
before that. Like, fucking God needs to come up with his own bullshit. And oh yeah, how old was Jesus when he shows up preaching wisdom beyond his years to the religious teachers in Jerusalem?
Well, he's 33 when he died.
How old was he when he showed up?
30?
Oh,
Well, I don't know.
wow, you've really let
Wait,
your
12.
knowledge.
He was 12.
He was 12
I forgot.
years old. This is a mythological construct that existed in God's prior to Jesus.
Oh my! I never thought of that
Right.
one.
They always show up at the age of fucking 12, showing that they have this complete wisdom and understanding
Holy
because 12 is the
shit.
number of the completion of the zodiac.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Interesting, right?
Bing, 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 bing,
It's going to get more so.
lights.
It's almost like someone was showing how complete and enlightened he was at an early age, an indication of his specialness. Many earlier gods had similar displays of advanced knowledge at the age of 12 in their mythology. What's the point? The point is, astrology defined these ideas, concepts, and symbols, and our religions are an attempt to make sense of the human experience through this celestial symbolism. It doesn't mean astrology is real or true necessarily. And it certainly doesn't mean that the Bible is true. It simply demonstrates how this system of symbols and ideas underpinned everything in ancient culture, society, and thought. Thinking that the Bible escaped this is just plain old wishful thinking. Okay?
Yeah.
We need to get our minds around this. The Bible emerged out of a world that thought of things this way,
Yeah.
saw everything this way.
Yeah.
Their buildings, their marketplaces, their roads, their homes were decorated with symbolism that pointed them to these
Yeah.
gods and these signs and these ideas that formed the way they tried to figure out the human experience was through this
Well,
system.
and it was okay. I'm gonna say it was like sounds like it was so as prevalent as it is today. Only they knew that it was astrology. I don't know what they called it, and we don't know it's astrology.
Right.
We think it's Christianity.
Exactly. Thank you. That is exactly right. The problem is we've severed our understanding of astrology.
Yes.
And so now we're set adrift in a world that's full of astrological symbolism, and we're reinterpreting it
Yeah.
in ways that take its true meaning away and its
Yes.
usefulness away. And then
Yes.
we form a bunch of like stuff that's causing problems.
Totally. This is what goes back to Joseph Campbell's quote of saying, "All the myths are true if you use them according to what they were written for." Because he had a student ask him, "How can you teach these? They're not true.
They're
They're
not
lies.
true."
How can you teach
Right.
this?" And he was like, "They're not lies if you use them according to how they were written."
Right.
And that's exactly what you're
There's
saying.
meaning imbued in these stories. And if you don't understand the language that they're using and the symbology that the people of that time understood,
Yes.
this wasn't secret encoded stuff. This was stuff
Yes.
people understood.
Yes.
Then you don't understand what it means.
Yes.
You can read your Bible all you fucking want to.
Yeah.
If you're trying to interpret it through an American, English, modern interpretation,
Yes.
you are failing and you should put it away because you're only going to cause problems.
Yes.
Anyway. So what about Christmas, though? Let's talk a little bit about Christmas since this is
This
the
is the Christmas episode.
Now that I showed you that, the Bible is all astrology and all the allegories and wrapped around, yes, historical events that did happen, whether they happened in the chronology or the time periods or that the figures that show up in the Bible are real. I mean, there's all kinds of shit going on there and people have different opinions. But largely, it is a huge allegory wrapped in astrological symbolism
Yeah.
because it was born out of the world that was
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
defined by it. But what about Christmas? Well, let's just talk about the virgin birth real quick. I'm just gonna get this out of the way because this is something that shows up in all kinds of gods. These dying and resurrected sun gods are typically born of a virgin, and so there are a couple factors that go into this. Remember, this is a world that has been studying astrology, and they also have inherited, especially like people like the Magi, which we'll get to, like these Persian astrologers and these people that were hired by kings and empires to consult the stars and give them wisdom and stuff. They had a deep understanding of the astrology of the past. They had developed systems of prediction. They knew where things were going to be. They could predict eclipses. We don't understand how fucking smart these people were.
Yeah.
We think they were just dumb and looked up the sky and imagined gods
Yeah.
and shit. These people invented math that we
Yeah.
still use. They
Yeah.
invented astronomical understanding that we still take into account.
Yeah.
They revealed to us things that we had to learn later even
Yeah.
because we lost it.
Yeah.
So we need to erase this idea of these people primitive. We just went back to Göbekli Tepe fucking 12,000 years
Yeah.
ago when they were doing shit that we did not think they should do.
Yeah.
Why did we think that 14,000 or 12,000 years later, or whatever, however long, 10,000 years later, that we weren't super more advanced in our understanding of how this went, right? And so when we talked about that precession of the zodiac, remember the sun moving backwards?
Yes.
Which means, we went from Aries to Pisces and we're going into Aquarius, okay? But if we go back even further, right, and we get to like the age of Virgo, when the sun rose in the sign of the Virgin, right?
Oh.
And as it moved into the preceding astrological age, the sun dawned in the sign of Leo, the sign of the king, ruled by the sun. Okay,
Holy
so Leo's ruled by the
fucking
sun.
shit.
So the Virgo gave birth to the king,
Yeah.
the sun, right? Okay, so that's kind of the macro picture they
Yeah.
had, but then there's this micro picture, and on the winter solstice at midnight, Virgo rises on the eastern horizon, so the Virgin gives birth to the winter solstice, which is the rebirth of the sun. So the virgin is giving birth to the sun. It's a virgin because it's
Holy-
tied to Virgo. If your daughter came
Yeah.
to you and said she's pregnant because of an angel, you wouldn't believe it, but you believe 2,000-year-old story, but it's wrapped in astrological understanding around the movement and cycle of the sun that we came to
Whoa.
venerate.
Like mind blown. I don't know.
Okay.
You've talked about all this stuff, and I don't think I've heard that one. And I'm like, duh. Oh my gosh.
That's pretty crazy, right? Pretty cool. As we saw, Christmas is about sun worship, specifically the rebirth of the unconquerable sun from its darkest day, the eve of the winter solstice. It's an astrological/astronomical event being venerated, not the
So-
birthday of some actual person.
I could literally, like, still, like the idea of the virgin birth, I could still observe it as a non-Christian because it's an astronomical event,
Right.
not a fucking Christian event.
Mm-hmm. And that's what it was intended as. Well, I mean, it depends. I'm going to do some episodes about Jesus and the theories about him. So, I mean, I have thoughts around this. But, I mean, this was an astrological picture that had
Yeah.
been laid thousands
Yeah.
of years before it had been
So you're
adopted
s-
into the story
You're
of
still
Jesus.
You could still ritualize it
Totally could.
because it wasn't a fucking real event that I now no longer believe because I'm not
Virgo
Christian.
still brings the
still does
newborn
that.
sun to the world on December 25th, technically.
Right.
Astrologically.
Astrologically, so it's still fucking mine.
It's still awesome. It's still, exactly. You can still own it. Reaching all the way back, human cultures have framed this drama in tales of real humans being born in very special circumstances, doing heroic and miraculous things, seemingly defeated, only to rise again as savior of mankind. Jesus isn't the first one. That is the mythology of the sun that has existed throughout countless cultures, mythologies,
Yeah.
different ways of framing it and different characters, but that is the arc that always happens.
Mm-hmm.
And the Nativity of Jesus that is depicted in the Gospels also includes tied to astrology. For instance, Jesus is surrounded by what at the manger scene?
Let's see, the animals.
Animals.
and-
A circle of animals with the newborn sun at the middle of it. That's called a zodiac. Okay. The major portion of the event I want to discuss is the visit from what have become known as wise men
Yeah.
or kings.
Yeah.
Many traditions, songs, and Christmas junk say there were 3 of them, but
Yeah.
no number is given, and this idea is derived from the number of gifts they bring the infant
Oh,
Jesus:
yeah.
gold, frankincense,
Frankincense and
and
myrrh.
myrrh. So these are also things that have existed as a combination of things throughout cultures, reaching back thousands of years before the first century.
Mm-hmm.
The Egyptian considered frankincense and myrrh together to be what the gods smelled. So they would bury their dead with frankincense and myrrh because it was symbolizing that they were going to the place of the gods. They would smell, they buried them with all kinds of shit because they needed all the stuff to go to the land of the gods, and they needed stuff to pay their way there and all this kind of bullshit. All framed around astrological ideas, by the way. But frankincense and myrrh was a sacred mixture. It was the stuff of kings who were going to enter the land of the gods. And that was the stuff the gods smelled, was frankincense and myrrh.
Okay.
Right? And there's also astrological things going on in that gold is typically referred to as a cardinal thing. Frankincense is a fixed and myrrh is like mutable because mutability is when you're changing. So when you're passing from one life to the other,
Yeah.
myrrh represents that, whereas frankincense is this kind of fixed middle constancy, and whereas gold represents kind of your emergence into the world, right? And so there's astrological even ideas in the gifts they bring. And everyone wants to be like, well, they're prophesying his death because myrrh was used to entomb people. Yeah,
Right.
it was, but it had greater astrological meaning than that. And the people would have connected to that and not to some like prophetic
Yeah.
2020 Christian idea that they learned in their community church, right? The truth is, the idea of these being kings or wise men are modern ideas and mistranslations contained in many versions of the Bible. The word used is magi, which was not a general term. It was very specific and denoted a certain class of priests who dwelled in Persia. Magi were Zoroastrian priests who had become world-renowned for their knowledge, understanding, and predictions made from the stars. In a world defined by astrology, these guys were seen as the most famous, capable astrologers in the world and were commonly sought out by kings and the wealthy to get their take on what the stars are saying. We get words such as magic and magician from these guys, and the hats they wore led to the wizard hats we have in movies, as well as the mitre hat of the Pope.
Mm-hmm.
So the word used in the gospel accounts, which only take place in Matthew and Luke, I believe, have the word is rendered magi. For some reason, it got turned into kings and wise men, and then all of our bullshit that we buy in like greeting cards and like whatever. Indicates these ideas like one of them's black and one of them's white and one of them's brown. We got real like tolerant with it, but these were Persian people. They all looked the same.
Yeah.
They were all from the priestly class. They dressed the fucking same, and they were world-renowned astrologers sought out. Again, in a world that was steeped in this and that people had a good understanding, these guys were the fucking men.
They're
right?
like the Pope of the world back then.
And remember, they're Zoroastrians. We talked about that in the last episode. They had a world that was defined by monotheism, and it was tightly tied to the zodiac. Okay, it was very astrological. They were astrologers because that was the basis of the way they saw the world their God had created. In Matthew and Luke, the only two Gospels with Jesus' birth narrative, stories that differ and contradict each other regarding several points, the Magi are said to have started on their journey to Jerusalem in response to a special star they observed, which had indicated a new king was born in Judea. We will get to some interesting shit around this in a minute, but let's continue the account according to the Gospels, more or less. They head to Jerusalem since that was the capital, and go to the palace occupied by the Roman stooge king Herod. Now, the Herod family had rose to power through some pretty shady bullshit. They had been tax collectors to the Jews on behalf of Rome for a long time. Powerful, rich, and seen as traitors by most of the Jewish people. After the Jewish revolt against the Greeks, the Hasmoneans were the ruling family. Many people know them by a different name, thanks to the Friends Christmas episode where Ross is the holiday armadillo. They were known as the Maccabees.
The Maccabees.
Which meant hammer. So you can imagine they were not nice,
but
soft,
if you're a Catholic, you
gentle
also know the Maccabees, don't you?
Well, it's part of
it's part of the
intertestament. Yeah, exactly. So we don't include the Apocrypha in the scriptures. I shouldn't say we. The Protestants don't include the Apocrypha in the canonical scriptures, but the Catholic Church does.
Yes.
And these were books that were written in the intertestamental period, so between the Old and New Testament. And it covers that period that we talked about in the Adrenochrome episode when Antiochus IV went in and desecrated the temple.
Yeah.
Remember the abomination of desolation?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So these guys, they're called the Maccabees. That means the hammer. So you can kind of get an image of what these people were like. They weren't fucking like softies, right? Once they ran the Greeks off, they instituted a strict Orthodox theocracy complete with forced circumcisions and adherence to a Jewish law. So they started remember, okay, you have to go back and listen to the first episode of the Adrenochrome series to know this shit, but there was divisions among the Jews. There was Hellenized Jews who were okay with Greeks and like kind of trying to assimilate. And then there was very, very traditionalist Jews, right? And remember, Antiochus comes back from being beaten in Egypt and he shows up in Jerusalem and there's this kind of conflict going on between these factions of Jews. And so he goes about and fucks up the, Jews and destroys their temple and all that shit. Well, in the wake, he left all these things that you had to offer to all these pagan gods, right? To Zeus and whatnot. There was this guy, his name is Mattathias. He was a priest, and they were trying to force him to offer to Zeus. And he's like, fuck you. I'm not going to do it. He was
Offer what to Zeus?
Sacrifices. To worship Zeus instead of Yahweh, which traditionalist Jews were like, no way.
Right.
So he's like, fuck off. So this really nice guy in the crowd stands up and says, hey, I'll do it for him. because there's like people like overseeing this and like they have to make sure this happens, and this guy won't do it. And they're like, oh shit. And so this guy steps forward and says, hey, no problem. I'll do it in his, like as a proxy, and we'll
Another
count
Jewish
as good.
guy?
Yeah.
Oh.
A Hellenized Jew, obviously. Or
Oh,
someone
who was like,
who's
you know, it's
fine.
okay, we'll do this.
And they're like, oh, cool, that can totally happen, right? Motherfucking Mattathias pulls his sword out, kills the dude that offered to do that. So then they call for Greek, you know, for officials like soldiers. Soldiers show up. He kills the fucking soldier, and then he ends up having to run. And he grabs his sons and he runs for the hills, and he fucking starts raising an army to lead a revolt. Okay, and these were known as the Maccabees.
Okay.
And the reason they're known as the Maccabees is because he had a son named Judah who apparently was just like a Rambo motherfucker in battle. And they started calling him Yahuda ha-Maccabi, which means Judah the Hammer. Fuck yeah. When people give you that name, you're a badass.
You're badass.
When you give yourself that name, you're a loser. But when other people start saying,
They're like, dude.
you're a fucking hammer.
fucking
Yeah.
hammer.
So that's what was kind of going on, right? They order the temple cleansed and so anyway, I should first say, so the Maccabees lead this revolt and actually end up driving the Greeks out. So now they're in charge, and they set up a very orthodox, traditionalist, theocratic government, right, in the stead with the Maccabees. Known as, in history, they're known as the Hasmoneans. Formally, the Maccabees was the nickname given to them, but the Hasmoneans was the family line. They order the temple cleansed and rededicated, even calling for all new vessels, implements, and furniture to be fashioned. Remember, he fucked up everything. He slaughtered pigs, spread pig blood everywhere, put an altar of Zeus in the temple. He desecrated it. That was the abomination of desolation. And so they're like, we got to cleanse this shit. So they got to go about all this ritual purification according to their law. And they've got to like make all new shit because it's all ruined, right? Once it was all ready, when it came time to light the menorah that needed to continually burn in the temple, they only had enough oil for 1 day. The story goes that it miraculously burned for 8 days until more oil was prepared. The celebration of this legendary and likely mythologized miracle is known as the Festival of Lights, or what we call Hanukkah. Just like
we're going to
Ross,
blaspheme all the holidays.
I was going to say, just like Ross Geller told you. Now, we were just walking in the park this morning, and I saw a menorah, and it had 9 lights on it, and I'm like, what the fuck, right? We're going to get to something. So there is an interesting little thing that we found out, in that the menorah was actually a official sacred implement that was used in the temple, and so it can only be used in the temple. So any menorah you see out as a holiday menorah, they actually call that a Hanukkah or something, but it's actually a representation of the menorah, but not actually what it looks like. We're going to talk about what it looks like in a minute because it's symbolic. Well, I'll tell you right now. How many candlesticks are on the menorah that burned in the Jewish temple of God, though?
Yeah, that's why that was the issue in the park. I was like, he's like, that's not what a menorah is supposed to look like. And I was like, yeah, it is. It's 9 candles. It's always 9 candles. And he was like, I've been studying it.
Yeah, I learned something new.
Yeah.
Is that, so, because I'm like, the menorahs have 7. Remember 7?
Yeah.
Remember the whole 7 thing?
Yeah.
7 days of the week and all that shit, and 7 this and 7 that, and 7 candles, 7 lights burn on this candlestick.
Okay.
Kind of like the 7 planets of astrology. But the Torah forbids the use of a 7 candle menorah outside of the temple of God, which doesn't stand to this day. So there are no 7 candle menorahs anywhere. But they represent the miracle and the celebration through a menorah-like device that includes 9, and they say that represents the 8 days of Hanukkah, with the one in the middle is the light from which you light the other candles. So when we look at like the symbolism of that menorah having 7 lights, it's almost like they're saying the fullness of God.
Okay.
Now remember, Zoroastrianism brought in this monotheistic concept where they took all these other gods and kind of relegated them to other things, and like, so you can see these developments of like, yeah, there's one God, but 7 lights represent him, which again, 7 throughout astrological thinking represents the fullness of those planetary expressions, which are tied to gods. It's like the fullness of the gods. Of course, the Hasmonean family quickly formed divisions and started fighting each other, vying for power over Judea, right? So, like, they end up ruling. Mattathias, he ends up dying. His son Judah actually takes leadership, but eventually these rifts start to form and people start fighting over power because that's what happens with a bunch of rich fucks. One of the branches of the family reached out to the influential Herods for help. They brought in Roman forces, crushing the opposition, but rather than returning back to their own lives and places, the Herods stayed, seized power, and were instituted as kings by Rome, who they were totally in the pocket for. So this political move of this branch of the Hasmonean family who are like arguing over power, they reach out to this influential rich family called the Herods. They were tight with Rome. They had been tax collectors for years. And even though they were traitors and stuff, it was like, these people have the resources to help us win this fight and will take control of Judea. And so they reach out to
their soul to the devil.
Exactly. So the Herods are like, we'll help you. They bring in Roman forces, and then they just stay. And they're like, oh, hey, we like this palace, and we're going to be kings now. And sure enough, Rome's like, rewards this loyal family that has brought in tons of money off of the Jewish people for them and installs them as king of the Jews. And so Herod was known as king of the Jews by Rome.
Yeah.
Now, he had no power and he had only limited authority. Rome saw him as a puppet and a vassal, but he was given that title and the Jews had to address him as such. So you got this traitor from this family line that were a bunch of fucking assholes, that basically took the throne from this Hasmonean, which is this kind of like legendary family that once ruled, right? During this period, there was a huge fervor over some hot new prophecies that were circling around Judea. After being thrashed for centuries and ruled by foreigners, a messianic fever overtook the Jewish people. There were many figures that arose, identifying themselves as a coming Messiah, a ruler who would lead the Jewish people in battle to overthrow the forces of Roman rule. Revolutionary leaders that attempted to rally the Jewish people in rebellion against Rome, all put down swiftly and proven wrong. The prophecies included the idea that this Messiah would spring from the Hasmonean line. In response to this widespread expectation, the Herods began taking wives from the Hasmoneans in order to label their sons as possible messiahs,
Right.
giving them holy approval to rule and thus keeping their line in place on the throne. So during this time, as Rome is ruling over them and all this shit's going on, these sects like the Essenes, like you talked about earlier potentially, and others that were dwelling in the land and kind of breaking off and forming their own Judaistic kind of ideas and lines of religion. These prophecies and these ideas, we see them in the Dead Sea Scrolls reflected in this period even, where people are starting to expect a military leader is going to emerge out of Israel that is going to lead us and finally destroy these fucks. The Hasmoneans did it. They got rid of the Greeks. So a Hasmonean's going to do it again. And so these prophets begin traveling around preaching about how Messiah is going to spring from the line of the Hasmoneans, from the Maccabees, and that this person was going to lead them out of this and restore the temple and Israel and the land of and people of God. And so there was all kinds of figures. Historically, we know this. There's evidence of this. All kinds of figures arose out of the Jewish people in Judea who were claiming to be these. Sometimes concurrently, there were 3 or 4 at a time that were operating, these revolutionary people, gathering followers as like, this guy is the promised one that these prophecies are talking about. So Herod's like, fuck, I gotta have some Hasmonean blood in here, you know? So they start taking wives from that line so that their sons have that legacy and can tie them to basically be like, my son's a Messiah, you know? Anyway, so it's just political shit based off of stuff that's coming from the cry of people that are being crushed and depressed and don't know what else to do. The people, however, weren't having it and continue to see their Herods as nothing more than evil traitors and the lapdogs of Rome, And they fucking were, right? He built the temple. It's called Herod's Temple at this time. That stood. It's the Wailing Wall, the Western Wall in Jerusalem, is the only thing
Remnant
that's left.
of it.
Right after the destruction of it in AD 70 by the Roman legions, but Herod rebuilt the temple. He financed it kind of as like a, hey, look, I'm a Jew, whatever. But they still fucking hated him. He was still considered a total traitor because he really was. So that's a societal and historical context that the Gospels are taking place in, right?
Yeah.
So when the Gospels open, this is the attitude. This is what's going on in Judea.
Yeah.
We always have these pictures of this quaint little town, that, a new king is born. No, this was fucking on the lips and minds of everyone and had been for decades.
Yeah.
They had been awaiting this military leader,
Yeah.
right? When the Magi show up at Herod's palace looking for the one who was born king of the Jews, this was on his mind, right?
Yeah.
We can't have these people thinking there's a fucking king born, right? Because they're all looking for him. He was the king. If some little bastard was seen as the Messiah by the people, it would likely bring about unrest at the very least, and maybe his own painful murder, right?
Yeah.
He's like, shit could get out of hand.
Yeah.
Also, the particular Herod ruling then was not in good shape at this time. He is recorded in history as having kidney disease and gangrene of the genitals. Fucking
How do they know that?
A. Because there's historical writings of what was going on and even descriptions of how they treated it and how they tried to do it and what the state was. People were writing shit. I mean, we have records, right? These conditions racked him with constant pain, itching, convulsions, intestinal distress, and paranoia. In other words, he is not stable from a physical or mental standpoint at all.
Yeah.
Okay. I mean, the record of his death, though it's been embellished by his enemies and things like that, is terrible. He basically describes him as like bursting forth and like fucking worms, and his dirt fell out of him, which is when your shit busts out of your bowels, and he had gangrene, and so it was infected, and then they just he was fucking not in great shape. He was not this picture of health by any means, and it was affecting him mentally. Herod calls the scribes and scholars to search the Hebrew scriptures for info. They come back by saying the Messiah is supposed to be born in Bethlehem. He sends them off and tells them to make sure and let him know when they find the baby so he can go and pay his own homage to the little king, right? He's like, hey, let me know when you find him. I'd like to meet this little guy, The narrative then says that the star moved, leading them to Bethlehem, where it stood still over the site of Jesus' birth. Actually, the text uses a very technical term. It says the star went before them. This was an astrological term used by the Magi for when a planet or star appears to turn or move backwards. It's an optical illusion created by various characteristics of Earth's orbital track, but that's what it looked like from Earth, and ancient astrologers refer to this as an object going before. So understand, when it says the star went before them, they aren't using some just like basic thing like, I'm just choosing words. These were words rooted in astrological technical language. And so when an object in the sky appeared to kind of turn around and go the other way, like you hear of like retrograde planets and things like that, they refer to that as going before, right? And so when it says the star went before him, that means whoever wrote that in the Gospels knew astrological terminology. Okay, they weren't just like, I just fucking chose that because I have a thesaurus on my desk. Fuck off, right? This was very deliberate and in indicating astrological ideas.
I'm like balancing between you're talking about Herod, who was real,
I know,
and these mythological parts.
Right,
so
right,
I'm
right,
like
right.
a little
Right,
hard
I'm pretending
time.
like it happened right now.
Okay.
We're going to talk a little bit more, and then we'll play a little devil's advocate and say, let's say it did, because people have looked into like potentially what was going on. But yes, I am right now telling you the story as it occurs.
Because my brain wants to know, okay, you're telling me it as it occurred,
yeah,
but then
yeah.
like what happened?
Yeah, hold on. You're totally right. I can even sense that in you, like, but but this didn't, like, what do you
You're
say?
mixing two real and myth.
Yeah.
So what's
I'm just telling you
happening?
the story as it occurs and filling in some details about what we know about this when it was supposed to supposedly happen, right? Then, warned in a dream not to go back to Herod, they head off back to Persia. Very Piscean, by the way, the sign of dreams, intuition, and deep knowledge, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so you see a lot of dreams happening in the fucking New Testament too. A lot of visions, a lot of what you could call like almost psychedelic experiences. Paul has one. Remember, all these visions show up. That's very Piscean. Pisces is the sign of visions and kind of the deep, dark unknown, right? Psychic kind of ideas and intuition. The story goes on to claim that Herod set about killing all the baby boys 2 years and younger. Remember that?
Yeah.
Okay. Now, this is highly, 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 highly unlikely that any of this happened. There is no evidence of it beyond Christian art and legends put together centuries later. There is no extra biblical evidence for the Magi visiting Herod or the murder of the baby boys. And you would think at least the latter one would show up somewhere. Seems way too intense not to be commentated on by someone.
Yeah.
Right? Someone who's going to be like, this is fucked up, dude.
Yeah.
Right? But you don't see any of this, right? The Church of the Nativity in Bethlehem to this day claims that they have the bones of these children in the catacombs underneath. However, after scientists analyzed some of the bones, they were determined to be mostly those of adults and were added over a long, long period of time, possibly into the early Middle Ages. After this report, the church no longer allows any analysis or study of the bones because it's one of their main attractions that brings in the donations.
This is the baby bones, but don't look at them or study them.
Right.
We
They're
just
like, no. This makes it real. And if people think it's real, they'll give us our money. So fucking don't look at these anymore. You don't understand miracles, obviously.
Quit examining our relics.
Yeah. So this didn't happen. Okay, this is allegory with Jewish revolutionary stuff mixed in, maybe. Yeah. And also some other intentions that we'll have to talk about in other episodes. Let's see. The earliest known artistic depiction of these visitors has them looking and dressed just like Persian Zoroastrian magi, however. Later, 3 names would be given to them: Balthazar, Melchior, and Gaspar. Maybe you've heard that in tradition. Yeah. And a church even claims to have their bones, of course. None of this is likely, and just another attempt at designing some kind of retroactive proof of the narrative's historicity. What about that supposed Star of Bethlehem, though, that supernaturally guided these magi? That's the way most see it because we don't understand astrology like the ancient world. These were people who did nothing but study the heavens and predict their movements in an effort to establish what would happen on Earth. Of special interest to the Persian astrologers was the identification of national upheavals, changes in governments, and the emergence of new rulers, right? These were people that had their eye on like the grand scheme of things by looking to the sky. I'm not saying that they were right, although people kept hiring them, so they must have been fucking good at something. But they were constantly looking to see what the fuck is going on in the world. Yeah. That's how they used astrology. They weren't like, hey, buddy, come over and have some tea and let's talk about your chart, man. That's what we do now. I love that. But then that was not the way they were using it. This was a very official, high level. Yeah. These people were elites in their society, sought out by the fucking rulers and kings and, They understood the motions of the heavens and there was no magical, out of the ordinary shit they were seeing. We think it was magical because we have severed our ties to understanding the symbolism of astrology that dominated their world. Without this proper perspective, our imaginations run wild, informed primarily by greeting cards and precious moments figurines. Right? We let all this bullshit inform like what it looked like, or what happened. If some crazy star was doing some unnatural thing, we would have so much evidence of such an event from a world where they literally all look to the heavens for the understanding of events on Earth. Yeah. If all of a sudden something out of the ordinary, some crazy supernatural event was going on, it would be reported around the world. We would see evidence of it everywhere that this happened. Okay? That's not what's... But... let's just play devil's advocate for a second and assume the Magi did visit Judea, okay? Some research scientists, again using archaeoastronomy, have searched for astronomical events that may have signaled to these Persian magi that something was up.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? Like possibly they did visit Judea. They didn't go visit Jesus because there was no Jesus, but maybe they wound up there based off of what they saw in the sky, whether it happened or not or whatever. It turns out there was an event that represented a very interesting conjunction of planets. It occurred on April 17th in 6 BCE. That morning, as the sun was about to rise, the typical scene of Venus, the morning star, bringing the light of the sun, was happening. So Venus is never very far from the sun, okay? Because it's actually, closer. The sun, and then it goes Mercury, and then Venus, and then Earth, third rock from the sun, right? Venus is never far from the sun and is usually the only star you can see as the sun rises. Due to this, the planet has been known for millennia, long before the New Testament, as the light bearer or the morning star, both of which show up in the Old Testament multiple times. In fact, it was a mistranslation from the Latin Vulgate's lux fere, light bearer or light bringer, into the English. So lux, we get our word light, lux. And then fere is where we get our word fairy. It's like to bring, to carry, So the light bringer, the light carrier is lux fere, right? Those two words were erroneously combined into one due to a copy error in the Middle Ages that invented the figure of Lucifer. They took lux fere, fucked it up, put them together, made it a proper noun, a personage, and literally invented a new kind of devil, right? Lucifer is not a real fucking thing. It is the product of a error made by a bunch of monks who combined two words together, and then that copy got copy. And by the way, if there's one of those in there, how many do you fucking think is in there? Okay, just in case you think the inerrant word of God, whatever, shut up. He was introduced very recently, relatively speaking, as another vision of the devil, all by monks fucking up their job. A simple copy error, and bam, you got yourself a new devil. So the next time someone tells you there is a Luciferian agenda, tell them that you are more afraid of the Mickey Mouse agenda. It's more real. Disney is trying to fuck you somehow. Lucifer's not real.
Lucifer's not
Mickey
real.
Mouse is. And they are probably doing some evil shit to us. Lucifer is not, so just drop that. That's a fucking mistake that was made, and now people run around going, Lucifer! It was a reference to Venus, who brought up the sun, the morning star, as she was called, because she was the only star you could see as the sunrise rises. But on April 17th in 6 BCE, some other planets joined Venus. On that morning, the moon, Saturn, Jupiter, all joined her, rising in the sign of Aries just before the sun broke on the horizon.
How did that happen?
Hey man, the planets and everything's in motion.
Oh, right.
The sky's in motion. Eventually, shit happens.
Okay, it was part of that changing.
Saturn
of what
and
the sky
Jupiter are
looked
going to
like.
conjunct on the 21st of this year.
Okay.
It happens every so often because as these things move, they eventually, kind of cross paths.
Okay.
And that's called the conjunction, when two things kind of are close enough to each other that they kind of appear from our perspective to almost be one object, right? Well, this morning, Venus not only is bringing up the light, but the moon is there with the sun, right? This masculine, feminine kind of idea, God, goddess kind of thing. And Saturn and Jupiter are together as well. Okay, we're going to talk about why that was significant. Jupiter was known as the regal star, the star that signaled the birth, rise, or significant events of kings and rulers. The prominent Saturn and Jupiter appearing as a single bright star in the sky would have been an indicator of something going on to these scholars. This event connected this king-making star with the planet Saturn, long associated with the nation of Israel. Even these Persian astrologers understood that Saturn was associated with the nation of Israel. They did a lot of that. They kind of assigned signs and planets and different ideas and gods to these different rulers. We see that all throughout the New Testament. These different nations have different gods, and those gods were associated with different planets, and they kind of became codified into astrology to where we kind of saw we could predict things because of these associations. What's going on with this country? Well, it depends what this sign's doing and this planet's doing and what sign it's in. You know, that kind of shit. They also tied the signs of the zodiac to various nations, empires, and peoples. Judea was associated with the sign of Aries the ram. This is why they would have headed to Judea. Not because a star moved through the sky guiding them, but because they interpreted the position of these objects in the sky. They're like, the king star matched with Saturn, the representation of Israel, you know, God, is rising in Aries, which that Judea is represented on the zodiac, and so that would lead them to interpret that a king was being born in Judea.
Okay.
Not that a star was floating across the sky and they're riding their 3 camels going, oh, let's just follow the star, right?
Right.
That is fucking childish.
So it was kind of like they were following the stars, but like a star chart that directed them to go to Judah,
They were
not a
reading the
literal
stars.
star in the sky.
Right. They were reading the stars astrologically.
And what the
coming
message said to them was go to Judah.
And then that was telling them, according to their beliefs, what was happening on Earth. And so they're like, we should go check this out.
Yeah.
Okay. Any idea people have of some floating star moving in the sky above them and coming to rest above the manger is the most ridiculous of superstitions. First of all, stars don't do that. And second of all, the proximity that most people see this star having with the nativity scene in Bethlehem would burn everyone on the planet to their fucking atoms, right? These are stars.
Yeah.
Giant nuclear reactors.
Yeah.
They're not floating above us, whatever. This astrological conjunction theory is interesting, but also a huge supposition. The issue is that there is still no evidence that these events occurred beyond church traditions and are developed much, much later. The point, though, is the Bible, Old and New Testaments, are littered with astrological references, symbols, ideas, and beliefs held at the time of the writings. But this shouldn't be surprising, since, as we saw last episode, Jesus is just another permutation of the sun god, adapted from and combined with Mithraism by Constantine and the pagan priests who would become the first bishops of the Roman Church. Whether there was a real person named Jesus is heavily debated. Some equate the character as an amalgam of multiple revolutionary leaders that we know were operating around the time. Could be. Others say a man named Jesus did exist who traveled around Judea preaching and gathering a following, said some things that got him in trouble, wound up crucified, and the end. The claim is that this real-life person was taken, embellished, and turned into a cult figure. Right, so there are a lot of ideas around whether Jesus existed or not. You know, some kind of say, he was just like, you know, kind of like a combination of these other things. Let's kind of Frankenstein them together and turn him into this kind of like symbolic figure. Some think he was real, and then the other shit was added later, turning him to a religious or a god, like he was just a man. To be honest, my personal take is that when you dig out all of the symbolism and allegory from the Jesus story, the historicity question kind of falls apart.
Yeah.
If you remove all the stuff that clearly didn't literally happen, you are left with a pretty unremarkable figure who doesn't really matter in the grand scheme of things.
Yeah.
So he said some nice shit. A lot of people have said some nice shit throughout the history of mankind. And Jesus' shit isn't all that mind-blowing. It's kind of common sense to a large degree and seen in other cultures, religions, and societies. The stuff that supposedly makes him special are all the miracles and signs and wonders. These are the things that make him God.
Right.
The miracles he did. He rose from the dead. But if those are all just astrological allegories, and you strip all that out, you're left with nothing that really fucking matters.
Yeah.
Beyond the meaning that was imbued in it through this stuff, which I think makes these things more beautiful and useful.
Yeah.
If you're looking at it as a book of something someone did.
But that's why But okay, so here's the thing. They say that the stories and the miracles and all that are what make him real, and what we're seeing is those miracles are the impactful, meaningful things about the story that speak to our lives. So they've just, as they do the whole Bible, literalized it
Mm-hmm.
and missed the point,
Yeah.
and then made this whole thing and kind of focus and lose it.
Right. They lose the meaning.
Yeah.
And then yeah, we don't, whatever. Anyway, I wanted to discuss this because at this time of Christmas, we're focused on all this stuff about Jesus and the Bible, and we're like, I'm walking around and I'm watching these people depict these events as if they're like historical ideas or like something that happened. And I wanted to take us through the idea that, hey, look, everything that we have in our world, the religion we have here in America, the Judeo-Christian we have, the Christianity we have, the religions that exist in other parts of the world are underpinned by this thinking because it seems to be the thinking that we originally formed our idea of the world around.
Yeah.
And we build from foundations.
Yeah.
And I mean, the Bible says that, right? You build your house on a house of sand, on a foundation of sand or whatever. You're fucked, right? You got to build your house on the rock.
Yeah.
So the idea that somehow this foundational concepts haven't imbued everything.
Yeah. No, what's interesting is you just used that story of a foundation of sand, and we've got to get to the real foundation to build something of substance that will last. The real foundation, where a lot of current people are looking at Christianity 6,000 years or 2,000 years ago, right, as their foundation. That's actually the sandy foundation.
Yeah.
The rock is the original astrology that all the religions have been based on and all of culture has been based on. That's your rock foundation, not the sandy Christianity story.
Yeah. Yeah, it's crazy. I mean, and I can recommend, like, if you're interested in learning more about this stuff, well, first of all, take my class. I fucking would love to teach you this stuff. I know quite a bit about it and am fascinated. I love it. I think it is so important for us to understand the language of it because it is all around us. And if we misinterpret things and misconstrue things, we head off in like just terrible directions.
Yeah.
Like let's get an understanding of what these things actually, the meaning that was encoded in them.
Yep.
Doesn't mean that we have to act them out here or that we have to hold them as true,
Right.
but at least we'll understand them from what they were intended to mean.
Exactly.
And I would recommend, like, if you're looking for stuff to read, if you're a reader or something like that, there's a great book out there called The Gospel and the Zodiac. It's by a guy named Bill Darlison. It's fantastic. It takes you through the Gospel of Mark and basically shows you how it opens with the beginning of Jesus' ministry with John the Baptist and all that shit, and how that is very Aries. Like it basically sections Mark up into 12 sections and shows how the flow of the narrative and the details in each of the sections adhere to this procession of the zodiac from Aries all the way through to his crucifixion in Pisces, only to be reborn again
in Aries,
like the fucking sun, right? The sun moving around the zodiac, reaches Pisces, comes to the end of the year, its darkest moment, it's about to die, reborn in Aries, and it continues the cycle again. And that's what Jesus is acting out in the Gospels as these writers framed these ideas around astrological thinking. So this is the language of our world. You can deny it. You can wish it wasn't true, but it fucking is.
Yeah.
Everywhere you look. Every movie you've seen has these characters that adhere to archetypes that we have established according to the zodiac thousands of years ago.
Okay. Wait a second. Could actually say with that information that you gave us that Jesus is the reason for the season, but not for reasons that you think.
Right. Yeah, no, that's true. Yeah.
We're trying to dispel that Jesus isn't the reason for the season. We just got down to
it's like Jesus is just,
if you know what the actual meaning of that story is.
It's like Jesus is our meaning for the season. And there's been lots and lots of meanings of the season. Characters adhere to that or whatever. But in our culture,
the name that they put and the whole story that they have going is a depiction of what's happening in
Yes.
the stars.
Yes.
And it is why they celebrated it. It's why they ritualized it.
Right.
And so it is the reason for the season.
And it's not just like when we say that, like it's what's happening in the sky. I think then people can relegate that to, oh, well then it's meaningless because we just imagined that. It was just like we were just seeing things.
Yeah.
Here's the thing. Yes, that's part of it, is that we did imagine, we did project, we did, these things don't look like these creatures. We connected those dots. We projected these things in a very intentional way.
Yeah.
And then we fucking aligned ourselves to them.
Yeah.
You know, when we look at the ages of the zodiac and like people living in the age of Aries versus the age of Pisces, amongst astrological thinking and astrologers, it was believed that that means that was the dominant energy at that time. That was the way you should be.
Yeah.
Like you need to get yourself in the flow of the energy that's going on. You could say, if you want to be like a modern hippie talking, you gotta, this is the vibe of the world because of this celestial thing going on.
To be in line with what was going on. And
Right.
So
And so
that
we
was the way the
aligned-
world was acting.
Exactly.
And so that's the way you needed to be function, to know what was happening, to know how the world around you was functioning. Interesting.
So shouldn't we then know what the zodiac says and means and what astrology is, so that when we do that, we do it in a way that's not, you know, destructive?
No, because we've created a world that we need to understand, and it was created. The philosophies of it were created long, thousands and thousands, millennia before. So imprinted on us that we've made it real, like we were talking about in the beginning.
No, I know. And what I'm saying is, it would seem to me then, if we're just playing out these patterns that have been like ripple effects that were dropped in the pond a long time ago, we should understand them.
Yeah.
Because if we're going to continue to play this out, we should do it in a way that's in line with understanding of what's being, what we did project, rather than this chaos that we seem to be doing, where we're like all seizing these other fantastical ideas and defrauding reality of the meaning that it was actually imbued with long ago. I don't know.
No,
that sounds weird, but
you gotta like think on that for a bit and like marinate your brain in that.
Yeah, because then there's part of me that's like, but we're in control. We can act however we want. But then it's like, are we individually? We're dragged by society.
Yeah.
Like when we get together, we act
connected.
very differently than we do individually. And so are we fated to just play out these patterns, and shouldn't we then know them?
Which also, that reminds me of one thing that you said in there, and I didn't want to stop and stop the flow, but talking about the aspects, the different gods, the 7 gods or whatever, and then they started saying, some cultures said one god, and it just reminds me that we have the idea of different aspects of ways to be, and then we also have the oneness. When people go, no, there's just one God, it's just when other people are going, we are all one. Both of those things are saying the same thing.
Yeah. Yeah. I think we get caught up on this idea of one and quantifying things, but really what that was talking about was that there is this thing that represents the completion of something, the fullness of something. And I'm saying the zodiac is the thing that represented that. And then our gods became,
Well, and I would say we call holistic living. We talk about whole. The idea is being one is not just like humans are one, but the entire creation is one. We're all part of, and we don't exist separately, like you were saying.
Yeah.
We're all affected. And so this idea of oneness is just a thing that exists, and we're all trying to talk about it. So they're saying, this religion is saying there's one God, and this religion is saying oneness. And it's all that very original Gobekli Tepe, when they were like, we were originally seeing ourselves as part of the creation, not above, but we were one.
And then we split ourselves off it, and we became gods.
Yeah. And then we had this, and we at the beginning of creating different languages around these stories.
So not a lot to do with Christmas, but a little bit. But I did want
No, I actually just like No, it to me totally blew open my
Yeah.
because I'm in a group. It's called Chill as Fuck Atheist Women Facebook
I love that.
group, and the subject came up of like some Christians saying you shouldn't be celebrating Christmas if you don't believe in Jesus, and I want to be like, oh, let me at
Oh,
her. Let me at him.
Oh, I
Because
love
Jesus
that.
is this story of this Jesus virgin birth stuff. Nope. It was ours. It was astrological. It was
I
not
love
even.
that.
Fuck
I'm
you.
like-
I can celebrate whatever the fuck I
I'd be
want
like,
because it's all
lady,
astrological.
lady, the idea that you have come to the conclusion of the truth of the universe and that you hold sway over all that is appropriate and whatnot. Shut the fuck up.
Yeah.
Come on.
Okay. Yeah.
Anyway. So that's
No,
this
so
one.
it was very, to me, impactful
good.
Christmas
I'm glad.
story.
I'm glad.
Even though
It was-
we had to have all that information about astrology to make it. Yeah, but that was
Yeah.
like boom.
And
that
it
whole-
was for myself a lot because I love talking about this stuff. And I just touched at the surface. Like you could
Oh, I
dig
know.
so deep into the mythology and stuff and find so many connection points. It's just fucking awesome and amazing. And it makes it so much more interesting,
Yes.
useful, and
Yes.
fucking it makes it feel like it belongs to me because
Yeah.
it sprung from the same experience as mine.
Yeah.
We take the Bible and we separate it into this thing that God told us, and all of a sudden it's separate from us, and we fucking don't, like you just said,
Yeah.
like you shouldn't be doing it because you don't believe. Fuck off. It's about us.
Yeah.
It's people crying out and having the same experience and having the same questions and looking for the same thing and trying to figure it out and symbolizing all this stuff. And to rob it from that makes it fucking
Yeah.
a cartoon
Yeah.
and stupid.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas once again. And sign up for my class. I'll teach you all about astrology and it will be very useful to you.
Yes.
Trust me. All right. See you next time when we talk about Santa Claus.
Woohoo.
Much more
Yay.
fun, much less technical, not as drawn out. It's just going to be like, let's check out the fat dude in the red suit and see where he
Santa
came from.
Claus.
All right. See you later.